Well, I'm definitely glad to see fit that the soundtrack seemed to calm itself down just before I started. Let's go ahead and reduce the volume on this. One of these days, I gotta read a book for a series that has, like, a more relaxed soundtrack. I swear to God. Hello! Welcome to the Sharkstream Book Club. It's me. It's Gage, your host with the most. The most what? Well, at the moment, probably steak. I am eating lunch right now. I am having carne asada. I'm just still kind of working on it. But yeah, hi, welcome. Oh. Hope everybody's having a good Saturday. Or Sunday. There are parts of the world that it's Sunday now. I don't know how likely I am. Like, I know at least one, like, occasional viewer I have that would be in a place where it's currently Sunday. At least one. But otherwise, I think most of the people who watch my stream, I'm pretty sure, are in areas where it's currently Saturday. But whatever day it is, where you're at, welcome. And I hope you're having a good one of those. I'm having a pretty alright one of those, all things considered. Today started out a little odd, actually, and that's entirely because I watched that new Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers movie, which is less of a Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers movie, and more a movie about Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers, but also at the same time not. I still don't really know what to think of it, honestly. Like, it hasn't really sat with me long enough for me to form an opinion outside of, wow, when they said that Ugly Sonic was in the movie, I wasn't prepared for exactly how prominent in the plot he was. I need, like, a napkin or something. I didn't bring any napkins with me. Yeah.
You said you need a napkin?
Yeah.
Okay. One second.
Okay, thank you, JB. Friend JB happens to be walking by and is going to deliver me from my torment. Ah, thank you.
Sorry.
It's okay. You just startled me. You're very quiet.
I did not want to possess Acid Shark.
Well, you're possessing him now.
Well, you know what? You did that to Oval yesterday.
I did. It's true.
It was funny.
But yeah, like, fucking, I wasn't ready, honestly. Like, that movie is called Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, and I think Ugly Sonic might have more screen time in that movie than some of the actual members of the Rescue Rangers. Which is wild to think about. And yeah, I mean, a comparison to Roger Rabbit is not necessarily out of the question. The movie is very much in some ways about the animation industry. You know, with its reference to like Uncanny Valley CGI and stuff like that. And just having way more properties present than just Disney properties. And just, I don't know. I think I liked it to an extent. Like, I think I thought it was fine. But like, I'm thinking in my head the phrase, I liked Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. And I'm thinking that phrase and turning it over, visualizing it, creating a 3D version in my head, rotating it. Rotating a 3D version of that phrase in my head. And something about it still doesn't feel right. And I'm wondering if maybe part of it is that, like, I guess I thought it was fine, but I kind of would have preferred just a Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers movie, I think. I really don't know. Like, again, it's more of a movie about animated movies than anything. Like, they take pot shots at, like, the Alvin and the Chipmunk movies, or the trend of, like, having, like, animated movie characters, like, rapping in reboots and stuff like that, which is a thing that, now that I think about it, does happen like a concerning amount. And like, if you've seen the trailers, you know that, like, there's the Uncanny Valley CG dwarf whose eyes don't really look at things. They just kind of stare straight on. Looks like he's fucking straight out of Beowulf. It's a fucking Zemeckis looking motherfucker. And it's just like, I mean, that bit is pretty funny. And then the bit where, like, he like eats shit later on, and other characters voiced by Seth Rogen make fun of him, is also pretty funny, I guess. Like
how you said that was a meat clip.
Yeah, I thought of you when I saw that clip.
I don't know how I feel about that.
I mean, part of it is just I know you do a really good Seth Rogen laugh. And that was like the punchline of that whole clip, was all of these Seth Rogen characters laughing together.
Just imagine 4 stacked slightly off sync.
Basically, yeah. Like, that's what it was. Because what was it? It was fucking Pumbaa from the CG Lion King. It was Master Mantis from Kung Fu Panda.
And Bob.
And yeah, the blob guy from Monsters vs. Aliens.
No one remembers that movie.
I remember it specifically because no one remembers it.
There you go.
I remember it so that they don't have to.
God damn it, game.
Thank you for your input, JB. But yeah, it feels like a movie where somebody came up with this concept. Somebody wanted to do Roger Rabbit 2. but, like, looked at what they had written and realized there's no way I'm getting this made with original characters. There's no way I'm getting this made, or I'm getting any sort of, like, eyes on this movie if it's original characters with, like, very little marketability. And so, like, Disney kind of thumbed through their archives, just like, okay, what names can we slap on this? How about Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers? And it's just like, yeah, okay. I think the other thing, so another thing that bothered me about that movie is just one of, like, the big concepts in that movie is this idea of, like, getting the CG operation. And it doesn't really play into the plot in a huge way, but it does. It kind of does, also. Like, the fact that a character is CG only doesn't really give, like, any sort of, like, doesn't really cause any sort of, like, friction necessarily or anything, but it does give a character familiarity with certain concepts that are then used later on. And it establishes that that sort of thing, changing oneself like that, is like a procedure one goes through. And like, what am I trying to say? Okay, I remember now. Now, one of the big things about that like, I think I myself actually expressed this opinion at some point on stream, is that whole conflict would work better if, like, our main quote-unquote 2D characters weren't also rendered in CG clearly, but just, like, cel-shaded to look like they're 2D. And the issue with that is that there are characters that are actually drawn in 2D and animated in 2D in, like, traditional 2D animation in that movie. And I mean, like, there's probably, like, a million reasons why it was done this way. You know, budgetary restrictions, needing to reliably have, like, the quote-unquote 2D and 3D CG, or the 2D and CG characters interact with each other. That sort of thing. But at the same time, like, I'm looking at this also, and I'm just like, this would hit better if these characters were actually animated like they're claiming to be animated. Like, if you use, like, the Chip and Dale Disney Afternoon style. And yet, they didn't. Also, like, I don't have any sort of, like, horse in this race or anything like that, but Gadget Hackwrench shacking up with Zipper and having 42 kids leaves a weird feeling on my brain. Anyways, we're here to read a book. We're here to read books. It's book time, baby. Let me go ahead and... Oh, shit. Oh, where did those go? Oh, well. I won't worry about it right now. So last time on Dead Space Martyr, now that we're like 20 minutes into the stream, I'm going to make a gross noise real quick. Hold on. Excuse me. So last time on Dead Space Martyr, we found a weird thing in a hole. There's a big hole, an ancient moist hole, and we found a big thing in it. And I am here today to tell you, we're about to enter this hole. We are about to get deep into this hole and unlock the mysteries, the hole mysteries, the holsteries. Upholstery? We're gonna find out what's going on. Is what I'm getting at. So we met some principal characters last time. We met Michael Altman, our protagonist of the story, and whose actions here in this tale are both established and predetermined. We know Michael Altman's going to die. We don't exactly know the circumstances of his death yet, but unitologists seem to think that he was assassinated by EarthGov. Well, I guess it wouldn't. Would it be EarthGov or would it be Sovereign Colony? Whatever. He was assassinated by the government, is what the unitologists think. Whether or not that's true is something we will surely find out by the end of the book. But regardless, he dies by the end of this story. And he goes on to be the central figure in a galaxy-spanning murder-suicide religion. As one does. You know how it goes. But what we believe that we have here is the OG marker, Marker Prime, the black marker, Prime marker. It's licorice scented. Can you imagine that? If markers had scents based on their color. Black marker smells like licorice. Red marker like cherry. That gold marker in fucking Dead Space 2, maybe like, I don't know, lemon or something. The mobile game has a white marker. Maybe that would be like toasty marshmallow. Toasty schmallows. Fuck, I could go for a s'more right now. That sounds pretty good. I could just fuck up a toasted marshmallow. I don't think anybody would blame me for that. I think this is a safe space to admit I would absolutely fuck up a toasted marshmallow right now. I have a book to read. We're here to read book. I should probably start doing that. So last time we finished part 1, Phantom Blood. No, I'm kidding. What was part 1 actually had? No, part 1 doesn't have a name. Part 1 is just part 1, but part 2 has a name. Part 2, Confined Spaces Tendency. No, it's just Confined Spaces. Now, as you may recall, chapters in this book are particularly short. They're starting to get a little bit longer now. Like, we had a couple chapters in the last part that were like max 2 pages. I don't think if we don't have one this part, then it's going to be a while before we've got another one of those. Hold on. Wait. Nope, I did find a chapter that's only about a page and a half. And another one immediately after that that's like 2.5 pages. So we do have some chapters that are, in fact, particularly short in this one. But it looks like most of them are confined mostly to the end of this part. So we'll at the very least have some chapters with a good bulk to talk about early on. So let's get started. Chapter 11. He killed himself. Just like that, the man on the vid screen said. It was less a question than a statement. He had a square-cut jaw and white hair that was swept back and plastered down. Even on the small vid screen, he was an imposing man. He was wearing a uniform, but his screen had been set to dither out his insignia to make it impossible to say just what branch of the service he was part of. That's what they tell me, sir, said Tanner. William Tanner was head of the newly established Dredger Corp Chicxulub, the semi-secret branch of the organization that had been set up hurriedly as soon as they'd had some indication that something was going on in the center of the crater. Tanner had a military background and specialized in running black ops through dummy corporations. He was running this one under the name Ecodyne. Ecodyne? Ecodine. Ecodine. Ecodyne. Eco. The smash hit video game from the developers of Shadow of the Colossus. Ico? Is that what Ico actually? I'm getting distracted. Ecodyne. Enter the right command into the system at the right moment, and any sign of a connection to Dredger Corp would instantly vanish from the company files. Then Tanner would vanish and reappear under another name. So far, his operations had gone well, partly because of good luck, partly because he was very good at what he did, which was why he'd been with Dredger Corp for 10 years. He didn't know the name of the man on the screen. All he knew was that 3 days before, he'd had a vid conference with Lenny Small, the president of Dredger Corp, who'd explained that they were bringing someone in from the outside. When Tanner asked who it was, Small had just smiled. "No need for names, Tanner," he said. He flashed a vid still of the man onto Tanner's screen. "Here's your man," he said. "You tell him anything he wants to know, and you do anything he says." Once Small disconnected, Tanner had shaken his head. Why bring someone in from the outside? Just one more possible way for something to go wrong. Just one more hole he'd have to plug after the operation was over. Small was getting soft in his old age, drinking too much maybe, getting sloppy, which put everyone at risk, which put him at risk. Tanner didn't like that. But when he saw the guy on the screen, first heard him talk, first heard the coldness of his voice, he realized that he'd misjudged his boss. This wasn't just anyone. This was military, someone who'd clearly seen a lot and knew better than any of them what was going on. Privately, Tanner started thinking of him as the colonel, though he had no idea what the man's actual rank was, or if he even had the right branch of the service. It wasn't even possible to guess where he might be. The background had been deliberately pixelated out, which lent an odd shimmer to the edges of the colonel's body. It was the colonel who had taken the data they'd intercepted from various scientist reports and generated a model that gave them an idea of what it might be waiting for them at the heart of the crater. It was the colonel who immediately had the security system replaced, who had seen the potential for the technician who had installed the first system to leave a backdoor for himself. When that young geophysicist named Altman, he is a geophysicist. We have confirmation. Named Altman, started asking around about anomalies in the crater, the colonel immediately had his phone tapped. A few minutes later, the colonel was back on the vid screen telling Tanner that Altman had already had a call from the technician. Bacon was his name. Or, no, not quite that. Another kind of meat. Ham. Really? Yeah, his name was, Al Pastor. His name was Mutton. His name was, Venison? It was one of those. Some kind of meats. No, it's Hammond. Hammond. Like, what kind of guy you gotta be to make that mistake? Like, bacon versus like, I get that bacon is like a viable surname and everything. But, like, really? Mistaking Hammond for Bacon? Seems kind of weird. Too late to trace it, the colonel said, but let's bring this Hammond in and have a chat. Which brought Tanner back to where he was now, impressed by how impassive and stern the colonel's face remained as Tanner told him that Hammond was dead. "Any chance they're lying to you?" asked the colonel. "I've seen the body myself," said Tanner. "He's dead, all right. They were just trying to bring him in, just talking to him, and he flipped and slit his own throat." "He what?" "Slit his own throat. Almost sawed his head off." "Just talking to him, you say?" said the colonel. "What's that supposed to mean? People don't just slit their throats when you're just talking to them." I just realized I never started the game footage. 1 second. Beep. Oop, and it is well in advance of where we should be. 1 second. Let's start it over. There we go. Tanner swallowed. Talking to the colonel made him nervous. "Any chance they nudged him along a little too hard?" Tanner shook his head.
I've worked with these men before, he said. They're completely reliable. They had their orders straight. Trust me, they were as surprised as you and I.
The colonel gave a curt nod. You think this Altman's a threat?
Tanner shrugged. I was hoping to find that out from Hammond.
Best guess, said the colonel. Threat or not? Tanner glanced down at the holofiles he'd spread before him, spun them through the holoscreen. Copies of them, he knew, were appearing on the other side of the link where the colonel could see them.
I don't think there's much to worry about with Altman, he said. There's nothing special about him. You're a run-of-the-mill scientist. No Einstein, not really the sort that stands out from the pack.
In my experience, said the colonel, nobody stands out from the pack until they're given a reason to. It's not until then that you know whether they'll bend or break.
I suppose so, said Tanner. In my experience, very few people ever get that far.
The colonel nodded, lips tight. But if Altman does? Tanner thought about it.
I don't know, he said. He doesn't seem to be the hero type. He's not likely to be an industrial spy from another corp, I don't think, and not likely to opt to become one. He seems to have taken his current job exclusively so as to follow his girlfriend down to Chicxulub.
Could be a good cover, said the colonel.
Could be, said Tanner, but you'd probably know better than me if it was, and if so, for what? I don't think it's a cover.
The colonel scanned quickly through the files. No, he said once he'd finished. I don't think so either. He stayed for a moment, staring straight into the screen. To Tanner, it felt like the colonel was staring through him, not even seeing him. Finally, the colonel said, Let's move things forward quickly. He turned his own hollow bank, sent a rendering through his vid screen to Tanner, a three-dimensional image. Some kind of vessel. At first, Tanner thought it was a space pod, and experienced a brief wave of fear. He had been part of the shock troops for the moon skirmishes, part of the deadly fight over which nation had the right to the resources of the moon. He had spent harrowing hours with his oxygen running out, siphoning from the tanks of the dead and dying around him. The last thing he wanted was to be in space again. But then he noticed the screw engines and realized it wasn't a spacecraft at all. It was some sort of submarine. Deep water from the looks of it.
What is it, sir? He asked.
The F-7, the colonel said. Prototype submersible. Not released yet, even among our people. I'm sending it to you. Find 2 men to man it, people you can trust, and quickly. We need to get there first. Okay. Let's just blue-skadoo we can do. Alright, so let's take a look at what it is that we are working with. So, we've met a new character, Tanner. Tanner is something of a company man. He basically does anything Dredger Corp tells him for the most part. And his entire deal is basically getting them into places they're not supposed to be yet. Like, what's that? We got some shit down in Chicxulub? Well, Tanner's the guy that they get to set up a shell company, basically a front of a sorts. Something that, so it doesn't seem like they're blatantly trying to muscle in before they get the proper, the proper permits and such to do what they need to do. And in this case, he has chosen a very, very sort of friendly sounding name. Ecodyne. Which is probably for the best because Dredger Corp sounds like a fucking evil ass goddamn company, if ever I've heard one. So Tanner was the one that basically kind of, well, actually, was it him or was it, he mentioned another name, I'm pretty sure.
1 second. Let me check here real quick. Okay, yeah. So, as part of Tanner's operations down here on the Yucatan Peninsula, he was given over to the authority of a man he refers to as the Colonel. Colonel. So the colonel may not even be a colonel. His actual like branch of military, his rank, what he is even fucking like supposed to be all about is at the moment unknown. But he is the one who found Hammond's back door into the system. Basically the thing that allowed Hammond to basically break in and monitor the lines that eventually led him to the pulse, which eventually led him to the marker. So Hammond was the one who alerted Tanner, and in the process also eventually alerted him to, hey, there's a guy who is like asking questions about some weird shit going on in the Chicxulub crater, which led them to Altman, which led them to tapping his phone, which led them to eventually finding out that he and Hammond were going to meet. And Tanner is the one who sent Tim, Tom, and Terry. So after Tim, Tom, and Terry talk to Hammond, and Hammond fucking doesn't quite cut his own head off, but makes a Pez dispenser out of himself, Tim, Tom, and Terry reconvene with Tanner, and they tell him what they know and what happened. And Tanner, Tim, Tom, and Terry are all very confused as to why Hammond would fucking slit his own goddamn throat like that. Like, they, like, as Tim, Tom, and Terry said, they hadn't even really, like, done anything to him. They were just like, hey, we gotta ask you some questions. And then Hammond was just like, you'll never take me alive, corpos. I don't, like, I think corpo, I got that from, like, Cyberpunk 2077 or something. Maybe. I don't really remember. I don't remember anything about that game. I didn't play a whole lot of it. What was I talking about? So Tim, Tom, Terry talk to Tanner, and Tanner's just like, oh shit, that's fucked up, man. And Tanner relays all this to the Colonel, and the Colonel's just like, Colonel's just like, yo, what the fuck? Who does that? Like, for real? Who does that sort of thing? That's wild. That's wild that he would do that. And Tanner's just like, right? That's what I say. Like, they told me, I'm just like, what? That's nuts. That's wild. That's super weird that he would do that. So, the Colonel thinks about it for a moment, and he's just like, okay, here's what we're gonna do. Let's see. So the colonel's just like, hey, check out this shit that I've been working on. And he shows Tanner his submarine OC. And he's just like, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to drill. We're just going to fucking drill already. We're just going to get down there. We got to get deep into this hole. Now, Tanner nearly has a fucking goddamn, like, nervous breakdown because he thinks that the submarine is a spacecraft. And we learned a little bit about Tanner. We learned that Tanner fought in the Moon Wars. I think the more text I have on screen that I'm like actively typing out is like completely fucking up my FPS. So basically, bunch of nations of the Earth are just like, okay, we're running out of shit here on Earth. We need to start mining the moon. Who's going to get to mine the moon, you guys? And they all fought over mining on the moon. On the moon. I don't know why they... Like, it seems like it's already a lot of effort just to get people to the moon. Maybe it's easier by this point. Like, why are you sending people up there just to fucking kill each other? If there were two guys... Fucking, the nations of the world looked at the moon and just like, if there were two guys on the moon and one killed the other with a rock, that'd be pretty okay with us, actually. So they sent up a bunch of people, way more than two people, to do just that. But he's clearly... Tanner clearly has... Tanner clearly has, like, some kind of, like, PTSD about fighting in these moon wars. So when he sees this submersible for the first time, he's just like, oh shit, I can't do it. You can't make me go into space. And before he can even, like, protest, he notices that, like, oh wait, it's a submarine. It's a submarine sandwich. Why are they called submarine sandwiches? Is it because of the shape? I'm curious now. Okay, Google. Why are they called submarine sandwiches?
According to Yankee Magazine, sub, short for submarine sandwich, is said to come from Connecticut, where what was originally called a grinder became a sub because of the sandwich's uncanny resemblance to the submarines in a nearby naval shipyard.
Huh. Well, okay. I learned something today. And really, at the end of the day, isn't that what's important? Learning something. Anyways, so the colonel's just like, yo, find two dudes. Find two dudes to shove into this hole. And Tanner's just like, you got it. And that's where the chapter ends. I don't actually remember if Tanner says you got it, but, like, he might as well have. Alright, and we're up to chapter 12. He chose Dantek. Dantek? 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 Oh, hold on. I love this scene where this dude turns into the fucking necromorph. It's really good. Oh, look at that. Yeah, look at that. Brah! So good. Alright, where was I? He chose Dantek, an ex-military man from his own outfit he'd brought with him 10 years back when he'd first signed on. Someone whom he trusted implicitly, and who, in addition, knew how to pilot just about anything. Dantek was good at thinking on his feet, very quick. He also had no compunctions about doing something questionable as long as Tanner was the one asking. But he'd also been known to be a little too quick to resort to violence if something went wrong. Something had happened to Dantec during the moon skirmishes, something that had left his eyes steady but flat, as if nobody was home inside. Tanner wasn't sure what it was. Well, Tanner, it sounds like maybe this isn't the kind of person you should put into a tiny submersible that's going to be miles down in the ocean. But what do I know? I'm just a shark. He's not a bad guy, Tanner told himself the few times Dantec had done something he'd found hard to accept, even with his own fairly lax morals. He just doesn't see things the way I do. And then, as an afterthought, he would often find himself thinking, I'm not a bad guy either. Tanner, we're just gonna keep reading. We're not gonna think about that. Tanner sighed. Bad guys or not, both he and Dantec would do what they felt in their own way they had to do. He had to search a little for the other man, pulling him out of Dredger Corp's North American headquarters. His name was Hennessy, and he was a marine geologist, also with quite a bit of submarine experience. He was bald, although still fairly young, mid-30s. He was also well-respected, and if he was already with Dredger Corp, that probably meant he wouldn't object too strongly to something a hair outside the law. But the Colonel's question about Altman was still nagging at him. If push came to shove, and Hennessy realized the full extent of what they were doing, would he bend or break? No way to tell, Tanner thought, but thought he was more likely to go with the flow than to protest or try to stop them. Tanner made arrangements through President Small, got Hennessy on the next flight south. By the time the man had reached Puerto Chicxulub, the F-7 had arrived, was waiting for them under a tarp on the deck of an unmarked freighter about 15 miles away from the center of the crater. Though a rusty hulk on the outside, the freighter was retrofitted with state-of-the-art equipment inside. It was crewed by either military or ex-military. They didn't wear regulation uniforms, but their training was clear from the tight economy of their movements, their meticulous haircuts, and the way they snapped to obey an order. Should we be careful what we say around the crew? Tanner asked the Colonel over the vid link-up. You should be careful what you say around anybody, said the Colonel. Then he showed his teeth in a way that Tanner guessed might be a smile. Definitely a carnivore, Tanner thought. Then the Colonel's lips slid over his teeth again, and he said, Don't say more than you have to. The F-7 was a bathyscaph. Bathyscaph. A bathyscaph. Bathyscaph. Whatever that means. A prototype drilling model, something made to descend to great depths and then bore quickly down through solid rock. Hennessy responded to it like a kid waking up on Christmas morning to find a pony waiting downstairs. He went around the craft with Tanner and Dantec in tow, babbling about the combination of the titanium alloy drill and the molecular pulverizers meant to keep the path clear. Tanner and Dantec just pretended to humor him. Don't tell me we're going down into Chicxulub, said Hennessy, excited. I've always wanted to go there. What are we looking for? You'll know soon enough, thought Tanner grimly. Just a few dives, he said as casually as possible. Just something to run the F-7 through its paces. Routine. Over the next few days, Tanner had them do just that. They put the F-7 through its paces, first seeing how maneuverable it was gliding along the surface, then testing it in deeper waters, and then finally testing the drill and the pulverizers. It wasn't the most maneuverable craft Hennessy had ever seen, but that wasn't the point of a
bathyscaph. That wasn't the point of a bathyscaph. It had to be solid and able to withstand tremendous pressure.
when it dived deep. On the surface, it bobbed drunkenly along, slowly tacking in the direction it wanted to go. Underwater, it was better, more responsive. And it was best of all once they had it boring through mud and into rock. Even when the drill was on full and biting into hard rock, the craft was stable, hardly shaking at all. Rear thrusters kept it up against the rock, and the drill pulled them forward if the threading had anything to grab. Meanwhile, the pulverizers turned the remaining rock into a fine gravel and forced it back to where it caught in the thrusters and kicked away or dissolved entirely. Hennessy claimed he'd never seen anything like it. They took the F-7 down 7 or 8 times. Test runs. At first, Dantec just watched what Hennessy did, listened to him talk, observed him. And then, one day, suddenly, Dantec informed Hennessy that it was his turn. But this is a delicate piece of equipment, cautioned Hennessy. You need to have months and months of training before... You're making my headache worse. Move, said Dantec. Hennessy, turning away from the instrument panel and taking stock of his partner for perhaps the first time, seeing his dead expression and steady eyes, did. That night, just as he had sat down on bed and began to take his shoes off, Tanner heard a knock at the door. Come in, he said, continuing to work on his laces until he saw a familiar pair of boots appear. He looked up. Why is it, he wondered, that Dantek always looks so predatory? It's you, he said to Dantek. Everything coming along nicely? Dantek nodded. I figured it all out, he said. You can pilot the thing if you need to. After a moonlander, it's a piece of cake, said Dantek. I won't have any problems. What about using the drill? Dantek shrugged. Nothing too complicated to it, he said. I know how to drill a bore tunnel and can probably figure out how to make it do anything else we need. Hennessy is no longer essential. If he gets cold feet or something goes wrong, I could take over. What do you mean if something goes wrong? Asked Tanner. Dantek shrugged. Just being prepared, he said. If something does go wrong, said Tanner slowly, I prefer you don't kill him. Dantek hesitated, then nodded. Your preference is duly noted. The next morning found Tanner speaking to an image of the colonel on the vidscreen. We're ready, he said. Anytime you want, we can move the ship over the center of the crater and drop the F-7. Both pilots are trained and comfortable with the vessel. Both are eager to leave. Very good, said the colonel. He seemed again to be looking through Tanner as if Tanner weren't there. Excuse me. Move the freighter into position tonight, he said. Tonight? Weigh anchor just before dusk. I want you in position by 2100 hours and ready to go by 2200. No need to tell your two pilots anything or do anything to make them suspect or get word back to anyone if you're... Get word back to someone if you're wrong and they're spies. Just wake them up and get them on board in time to drop the F-7 well before midnight. Yes, sir, said Tanner. The colonel reached out to disconnect the link, then stopped. You look tired, Tanner, he said. Everything all right? I'm fine, sir, said Tanner. Just a little headache. I've been having trouble sleeping, but nothing to worry about. Tomorrow may be a historic moment, the colonel speculated. Yes, said Tanner. What do you think is down there? Tanner had been wondering the same thing for days now. How could something seemingly man-made end up at the bottom of the crater, buried under miles of rock? I don't know, he said. Maybe it's just a natural formation that somehow doesn't seem natural. Or maybe it's something man-made that's been placed there God only knows how. Or maybe... He said, but couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. It was too big to get his mind around. Maybe what? Asked the colonel. Tanner shook his head to clear it, which just made the headache throb more. I really don't know, sir, he said. I'll tell you what you're thinking since you're not man enough to say it yourself, said the colonel. You're thinking, sure, may be constructed. But not by us. Not by humans. Tanner didn't say anything. Believe it or not, Tanner, it's a genuine possibility. That's what we're hoping for. The first contact with intelligent life other than our own. It made Tanner dizzy to think about, even scared him a little. If that was what it was, if that's what happened, it could change everything. With a little luck, we'll know soon enough, he said in as steady a voice as he could muster. I'll keep my fingers crossed, sir, he added, then cut the link. Okay, we got a couple more people to deal with. Blues, do recap space. So our good buddy Tanner has brought on a number of people. We have Dantek. So Dantek is an old war buddy of Tanner's. He may also have moon PTSD from the sound of things. You know, just based on how he is talking about, like, if we need to get rid of him, don't worry. I know how to pilot the thing. And Tanner's just like, please don't kill him. Like, what? Why is that your go-to for everything? So Dantek's, like, eagerness to just straight up murder kind of puts Tanner off. But Tanner's just like, he's fine. He's a good guy. And I'm a good guy. neither of them are good guys. Let's be real here. We also have Hennessy. So Hennessy is a marine geologist. So specializes in like underwater rocks, minerals, rock formations, things like that. And Hennessy's honestly just really happy to be here. He's super excited about using the bathyscaphe. He's really jazzed that they're going to be drilling into the Chicxulub crater. Doesn't actually know what they're going to be doing down there. But I honestly, just based on his reactions, I don't know that he cares necessarily. He's just super jazzed. He's so pumped. He's like really excited. I'm sure nothing bad is going to happen to our pal Hennessy. Now, of course, Dantek then shows up. Dantek, like, kind of intimidates Hennessy into letting him take over the controls for a bit. And then afterwards, he's like, yeah, don't worry. If I have to kill Hennessy, I will be able to pilot the bathyscaphe. And Tanner's just like, please don't kill Hennessy. This upsets Dantek. Dantek really wants to kill this guy. He's chomping at the bit. Like, he's just like, oh, I really want to murder this man. And Tanner's just like, no, Dantek, bad dog. And he sprays him with a water bottle, just like, no murder. And Dantek's like, ooh, I don't like it. I like it sprayed with the water bottle. It's not exactly what happens, obviously, but the equivalent happens. Now, the last kind of notable thing that happens is that in a conversation with the Colonel, Tanner mentions that he has a headache and that he has had trouble sleeping. Which, since we are, in all likelihood, dealing with a marker, is not a good sign for Tanner's chances of making it through this book. Because that means that he is seeing some early stages of marker madness. So, Tanner is, in all likelihood, not particularly long for this world, but we'll get to see how far he makes it into the narrative before he just gets fucking owned, I'm sure. So on that note, let's go ahead and take a look at them. I think the next chapter involves them actually boring into... let me take a look here. Oh, no, not yet. Okay. All right. So, Tanner has been given instructions to basically get drilling as early as possible, midnight, potentially, before any potential spies have the chance to radio back to whatever other industrial corporation they might be spying for. Industrial espionage always seems like one of the more boring kinds of espionage, honestly. What was I talking about? Record scratch? All right, let's get on to chapter 13. He was trying to run, but wasn't getting anywhere. His arms and legs were flailing in the air, but nothing was happening. He couldn't even feel the ground beneath his feet. There was something wrong with the air. Every time he tried to breathe it, he ended up coughing, choking. He was slowly suffocating. He looked frantically around him, but on every side it was the same. An endless gray expanse, nothing solid, nothing definite, just he, himself, alone, floating in a void, dying. He knew he was dead, but he still somehow was. He was floating, his eyes open but seeing nothing, his body turning slowly around and around. There was nothing there but him. But he wasn't exactly there. He heard something, quiet, like the sound of an insect scuttling over paper. It slowly got louder. It blossomed into a loud whisper, a human voice speaking to him. Hennessy, it said. It was a familiar voice. He wished it would speak louder than a whisper so he could be sure about who it was again. Or about who it was, excuse me. Hennessy, it said again. He heard it close to his other ear, and then in two slightly different whispers at once. It wasn't just one voice, he suddenly realized, but legion, all of them, whispering, all of them saying his name. Hennessy, Hennessy, Hennessy. And then, spinning around, the gray space around him suddenly didn't look so gray anymore. It was changing, transforming, becoming something else. My phone just buzzed. Really? Okay, 1 second, everybody. Alright, I'm back. Hold on, let me... What was I doing? Oh, yeah. Fuck, I forget where I left off on the page. Shit. Also, it's very warm in here. Hold on. I'm gonna turn on a fan or something. There we go. Trying to hold my place in the book while also putting my headphones back on. There we go. All right. Didn't look so great anymore. It was changing, transforming, becoming something else. He knew he was dead, and he couldn't move. All he could do was stay there, floating, body spinning slowly about, listening to the voices as the blank gray void that had been all around him quickly became more and more textured. For a moment, it was striated, run through with creases and lines, then those shifted and crumpled in a way that reminded him of a human brain. And then these too, tightened and stiffened, beginning to take on vague features. It was not a void, he realized, but a tightly packed mass of bodies, stuck to one another, fading into one another, all of them dead. He wanted to close his eyes, but couldn't. There were thousands of them, maybe more, and the faces became more and more differentiated. He began to realize that they were people he knew, all of them dead. There was his wife there, her neck broken from the accident, his mother and father both withered and decrepit just as they had been after the cancer took them, and others, many others, whom he hadn't forgotten, but who, upon noticing them, he knew were all dead. Hennessy. The word came from one of the open and unmoving maws like an echo from deep within a cave. But which? Hennessy, said another. And soon they were all saying it, pressing closer and closer to him, and there was nothing that he could do to stop them, and then their fingers were sliding under his skin, threading through his bones, insinuating their way into him. Hennessy! Someone was yelling. Hennessy! Something was grabbing him, shaking him. Hands. Someone was screaming. Hennessy realized, and then he realized that somebody was him. He lashed out and scrambled backward, out of the grip of whatever it was, until he struck a wall. It was only then that he was able to stop screaming and consider where he was. Normal room in the Dredger Corp complex in Chicxulub. There was his bed. It was his room. It was okay. He was back in the real world. There was a man bent over near the bed, an ordinary-looking man wearing glasses. "Jesus," said the man. He was covering his nose. Blood was dripping through his fingers and onto the floor. "What did you do that for?" Behind him, Hennessy saw were two larger men. They looked like they might be brothers or even twins. He'd seen all three looking around at various times within the complex, but never was quite sure what they did. "You want us to rough him up a little bit?" said one of the larger men. "Soften him up a little?" said the other, and smacked his fist into his palm.
You know we can't do that," said the man with the glasses. We're just supposed to fetch him."
I'm sorry," said Hennessy to the man with the glasses, confused by what they were saying. I was having a bad dream."
"Bad dreams seem to be going around lately. It must have been one hell of a bad one,"
said the man with the glasses. He tilted his head back and moved his hand away. The bleeding seemed to have mostly stopped. He gave an experimental sniff. What are you doing here?" Hennessy asked.
"We was sent to get you," said the man with the glasses. "Get dressed."
Maybe I'm still dreaming, thought Hennessy. Get me? For what?
"Me when I get you. You're needed elsewhere. Just get dressed and come on. Or do you want me to let Tim and Tom work out some of their nervous energy on you?"
They took him down to the dock, Tim and Tom to either side of him, the man with the glasses leading the way. There was a large speedboat there. Dantec, already inside it, seemingly at ease, sitting straight-backed, his arms crossed. Unlike him, Dantec didn't have an escort. One of the vaguely military men from the freighter was standing with one foot on the dock, the other on the deck, ready to cast off. "Where are you taking us?" Hennessy asked the man with the glasses. He was still rubbing the bridge of his nose.
"We were told to bring you to the boat. That's all I know."
"Get on," said Tim behind him. "Or do you want us to put you on?" asked Tom. Hennessy scrambled aboard, sat down next to Dantec. The soldier cast off, pushed away from the dock, and scrambled into the pilot's seat. A moment later, the engine was screaming, and they were tearing across the dark water. Do you know what's going on?" Hennessy asked Dantec over the roar. Dantec gave him a hard, dead look.
"We've been activated,"
he said. "Activated?" wondered Hennessy. "What does that mean?"
"You know, like almonds."
With the wind and spray of the water, Hennessy was soon freezing. His teeth were chattering by the time they arrived at the freighter. They climbed out and up the ladder to find Tanner waiting for them on deck.
"You made good time," said Tanner to the motorboat pilot. "Well done, son."
"Thank you, sir," the man said. Tanner turned to Hennessy and Dantec.
"Well," he said, "I bet you two are wondering what the hell's going on. Come on to the bridge and we'll talk."
After Tanner had finished explaining, Hennessy felt there was something wrong. Sure, he was excited to go down to the center of the crater, excited to find out what was there and see where it was from. It could, as Tanner said, be amazing, maybe even the first signs of intelligent extraterrestrial life. But maybe it was nothing, just an anomaly. He had to try not to get too excited. Plus, something just didn't add up. Certainly, Dredger Corp wasn't the only one to have detected the object, and even if they were, didn't they have an obligation to report it? Then they have to go through proper channels, consult with the Mexican government. Shouldn't it be a joint project? Something that Dredger Corp was in on, but which the government controlled instead of a hurried and sudden operation in the dead of night? Has this guy, lived on planet Earth for any period of time? I don't know where he's from that corporations work like that. Fucking fantasy land. No, they were definitely up to no good in a way that might have serious consequences. Maybe he was a little naive. Yeah, naive. Maybe in the past he'd sometimes looked the other way when things were questionable, but he wasn't that naive. He knew that if anything went wrong, it would be either Tanner or Dredger Corp that got stuck with the blame, but it wouldn't be either Tanner or Dredger Corp that got stuck with the blame, but he and Dantec. Dredger Corp would cut them loose without a second thought. He looked over to Dantec, who turned and met his gaze. He seemed cool as ever, his gaze dead, his eyes predatory. He doesn't care, Hennessy realized. He'll do whatever he's asked. So Hennessy took a deep breath and turned to Tanner. "Why at night?" he asked. "Why not?" said Tanner. "The F7 has lights. You'd have to use them anyway once you got far enough down, and would definitely have to use them once you started digging." "I don't think that's what he's asking," said Dantec coolly. I don't think I did that voice right. "No," said Tanner. "What's he asking then?" "If it's legal." "Is that right?" said Tanner, turning to Hennessy. "Is that what you're asking?" Hennessy hesitated a moment, then nodded. "It just seems a little odd to me," he said. Isn't all this whole crater owned by Mexico? Wouldn't it have to have been leased by a local retrieval organization? And what's going on with the crew of this freighter? Are they military or not? If they are, why aren't they wearing uniforms? Whose side are they on? If they're not, then what the hell is going on? You don't need to think about that, said Tanner. I'm handling all the details. There's no reason for you to worry. But we're the ones who will bear the brunt of it if things go wrong, said Hennessy. Tanner didn't say anything. Aren't I right? Asked Hennessy, appealing to Dantek. Shouldn't we be worried? Don't you have a problem with this? Dantek said nothing. Hennessy turned back to Tanner. Shouldn't I be worried? He asked. Tanner said, I've already given you an answer. Hennessy sighed. Look, said Tanner, don't you want to be in on this? It could be extremely important, but that's not to say there aren't some risks. You have to decide for yourself, Hennessy. If you don't want to go, you don't have to go, but you have to decide right now. Hennessy hesitated a long time. Whatever this was, legal or not, it was big, important. He couldn't trust Tanner, but then again, he couldn't really trust anybody at Dredger Corp. He'd known that when he signed on, but he'd always managed to avoid getting into scrapes before. Whether what they were doing was legal or not, he told himself, he could make sure that his part in it was legal. Besides, if things got too bad, he could walk later. He'd go along with them, but he wouldn't trust Tanner as far as he could throw him. He finally nodded. Good, said Tanner. Off you go then, both of you. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Beep-a-dee-boop-boop-boo-boo. Okay. So, things have progressed somewhat. So our point of view character from this chapter is Hennessy. And when we start, Hennessy is having a bad dream. Now, Hennessy's dream seems like it's running on, like, Unreal Engine 3, just from the sound of it. Like, it's honestly kind of funny the way that he describes it. It being, like, a like, blank gray expanse, and then, like, lines becoming more defined, and then suddenly, like, getting, like, texture and color and everything. It seems like a video game loading in to a new level. Which is just very funny to me. Hennessy had a weird dream. Could it be because of what he drank last night? What do you imagine he drank? Could it be, perhaps, bourbon? Vodka? The fucking Titan Elementary music always catches me off guard when we're moving through this fucking soundtrack. Pop Rocks and Soda, probably. I'm assuming the joke here is that his name is Hennessy, which is also a name of a brand of alcohol. I'm assuming this is the bit. I actually had a little bit of that one time. Like, I think, where was I? I had gone on a trip to, like, I want to say, like, San Antonio or something, and got, what was it called? It was like a henchada is what it was. It was like horchata with, like, a tiny bottle of Hennessy, like, turned upside down in it, so that, like, as you drank it, it became more and more alcoholic. I don't remember liking it particularly much. But that was like that's a bit stronger of alcohol than I'm normally, like, used to. At least taste-wise. Because, like, I don't usually drink. I'm not a big drinker. But yeah, Hennessy has a scaly dweem. And there's all these corpses. And we learn that Hennessy has more than a few dead people in his past. He mentions his parents succumbing to cancer, and he also mentioned, like, a wife or a girlfriend or something. His wife being in an accident and breaking her neck. And then a number of other people that he says he hadn't forgotten, but that he knew were dead. So, potentially, like, people that like weren't actually like dead IRL, but within the context of the dream are super dead. So Hennessy is woken up by Tim, Tom, and Terry. And he decks Terry in the fucking nose in his, like, wild nightmare thrashing. So now Terry's got to deal with that. And Tim and Tom are there being menacing and vaguely threatening for basically no reason. Like, they're just... It's wild. Like, these fucking guys, like... These fucking guys show up at these times to, like, collect people. Like they did with Hammond, like they're doing with Hennessy. Just people with H names, I guess. And they're just, like, vaguely ominous about it. Like, they're just like, God, they're like fucking seconds away from just snapping and beating the shit out of whoever they're being sent to collect. And it's not really a good business practice to be like that. Like, can't you people, like, can't you just be cool? Why do you have to be like this? I don't understand. But alas, they are in fact like that. So they collect Hennessy, and they bring him to a speedboat. And Dantek's like, they're just like, we've been activated. And it's just like, bro, why is everybody involved with this a fucking freak? Like, for real. What is wrong with the people involved in this project? They're all working for a fucking, like, greedy corporation. That's what's fucking wrong. Like, it's comical, almost. Like, you've got Tim and Tom, the vaguely ominous fucking, like, gorilla twins over here. And then you've got Dantek, who is just, he is just ready. Like, he's the kind of guy who walks into a room and has a plan to murder everyone in that room at the drop of a hat. If he has to. And he's just constantly waiting for an excuse. And it's nuts. It's nuts. So they arrive and they meet up with Tanner. And Tanner's just like, we're gonna drill. We're gonna get right on down there. And Hennessy's just like, what? It's the middle of the fucking night. Why would we drill now? And Tanner's just like, yeah, why not? You know, it's gonna be dark anyway. We might as well just drill now. And Dantek's just like, bro, he's asking if this is legal. Which, like, clearly it isn't. And Hennessy's pointing out, just like, yeah, there's, like, all sorts of, like, hoops we need to jump through in order to even be able to do this, and we need to have, like, the cooperation of the Mexican government, and all the time Tanner's just standing there, just like, just like staring at him, just like, bro, you serious right now? Is he being serious right now? And like Dantek and Tanner are just like, we don't fucking care. We're gonna listen. We're gonna get in there. We are going to get this hole, whether you're on board or not. Don't you want to be inside the hole, Hennessy? Hennessy, are you not a fan of hole? And Hennessy's just like, no, I love hole. Hole is like my favorite thing. And they're just like, well, okay, get in the fucking hole. And Hennessy's just like, okay. I still don't feel great about this, though, but I really want to get in that hole. And thus, the whole adventure begins. Yep. Chapter 14. He'd never been inside the bathscaff at night before. The fluorescent lighting, with darkness all around, struck him at once as harsh and dirty, like the office of a deranged dentist. It cast both his face and Dantek's in stark relief. They strapped into their seats, Hennessy at the controls in front, Dantek just behind and to his right, beside the ballast release. The hoist lifted them up and over the water. They hung there, swaying for a moment, then suddenly were released. They crashed into the water, and the darkness became even more total. Dantek flicked on the exterior lights, which dimmed the lights inside. And as he checked the controls, he put in his earpiece and adjusted the microphone so it wasn't scraping against the side of his cheek. He ran the F7 briefly forward and backward, turned on the drill, and watched it swirl. He checked the sonar signal. He checked the fathometer? Fathometer? The fathometer? Fathoms? Fathom? We can go with fathometer. We're gonna go with fathometer. That's my best guess. He checked the fathometer and had Dantek verify the porthole seals. Everything seemed to be in order. "This is Plotkin," Hennessy said, speaking his codename into the mic. "Are you there, dropship? Are you reading me?" Tanner's voice cracked to life in his ears. The man was there on the hall screen as well, his image crisp, well-defined. "Hearing and seeing you loud and clear," Tanner said. "Everything a go?" "Roger," said Hennessy. Dantek confirmed. Or Dantek confirmed. That's a separate sentence. Part of a different sentence. "Proceed when ready, Plotkin," said Tanner. Hennessy stayed for a moment, with his hands on the controls, then cut the vid link and dived. Now it is just a matter of time, thought Hennessy. 4 or 5 hours. He leaned back and stretched. At first, they went down slowly, then a little faster. He was careful to adjust. The air in the F7 had grown thick and noticeably warmer. He and Dantek checked the oxygen recirculator, even though they knew it was just the climate system kicking in, that it was deathly cold outside. There was, from time to time, the flash of a fish through their running lights, though as they descended farther and farther, this became more and more rare. Mostly it was just the two of them in the cramped vessel, breathing each other's air, waiting, just waiting. His head hurt. It seemed like it was always hurting these days. He turned slightly in his seat and cast a brief glance at Dantek, who was staring at him with steady eyes. "What is it?" asked Hennessy. "What's what?" asked Dantek. Hennessy turned back. That guy's enough to freak anyone out, he thought. It seemed to get even hotter. The air became even more oppressive and difficult to breathe. Another 100 meters. He'd never considered how small it was inside the F7, but now that they were descending and the instruments didn't need much attention, that was all he could think about. He was sweating. It was really pouring off him, buckets of it. He felt as if he could drown in his own sweat. He laughed. "What?" said Dantek. He laughed again. He couldn't help it. He knew it was absurd to think of drowning in your own sweat, but what if it happened? It was absurd, but all of this was absurd. "Take a deep breath and get a hold of yourself," said Dantek. He knew Dantek was right. The last thing he wanted was to dissolve into hysteria here in a craft hardly bigger than a winter coat, miles from help. No, he couldn't do that, no. But then there came another chuckle. He heard Dantek's seatbelt click off, and then suddenly the man was there beside him, leaning on the instrument panel, the bath scaff listing slightly for just a moment before correcting itself. He chuckled again, and Dantek reached out and clamped his hand around his throat. Suddenly, he couldn't breathe. "Listen," said Dantek. "We can do this 2 ways. We can do it with you alive, or we can do it with you dead. It doesn't matter which way we do it." He struggled, but Dantek was too strong. He had never felt anything like it, had never been so afraid. He was beginning to black out, red spots blotting out his vision. He kept gulping for air, but getting nothing. Finally, when he was just on the verge of passing out, Dantek let go, gave him a long, hard stare, and slowly returned to his seat as if nothing had happened. Hennessy sucked in air, panting, massaging his throat. "All right now," asked is that a question? There's no question mark on it. "All right now," asked Dantek, his tone flat, less a question than a command. "Yes," Hennessy said, and was surprised to find he did feel a little better, a little more in control of himself, though his head now throbbed even worse than before. Hennessy checked the controls. They were still on course. Had Dantek's actions really been necessary? It's just a little giggle, after all, nothing to get upset about. But Dantek had overreacted, had made a big thing of it. Someone could have gotten hurt. What had Tanner been thinking, confining Hennessy to this sinking coffin with a madman? Maybe Dantek was stronger, maybe Hennessy couldn't do anything now, but let him get back on land and he'd know what to do. He'd file a formal complaint. He'd go to Tanner, tell him about how Dantek's behavior fucking shit! He'd go to Tanner and tell him about Dantek's behavior and demand the fellow's dismissal. And if Tanner wasn't willing to do anything, he'd go over his head. He'd keep filing complaints till he'd gone to the very top, to Lenny Small himself. Surely President Small was a reasonable man. And if even Mr. Small wouldn't listen, then he'd show them all. He'd take a gun and he'd... 1,000 meters, said Dantek. Hennessy started guiltily, his thoughts dissolving. 1,000 meters, he repeated. He noticed a tremor in his own voice, but not too bad. Maybe Tanner wouldn't notice. He put the vidlink through. "Mothership," he said. "Come in, Mother." Tanner's voice crackled in, weaker now. His image was present but less clear, eaten away at the edges. "Here, F7, said Tanner. "Still reading you." 1,000 meters, he said. "Seal's good, instruments good, no problems to report." "Very good," said Tanner. "Proceed." They kept descending. It seemed even slower than before. "Everything okay on your end?" Hennessy asked Dantek. "Fine," said Dantek. "And for you?" Hennessy nodded. When he did, it felt like his brain was rubbing up against the walls of his skull, getting slightly bruised. "Is the oxygen okay?" he asked. "You just asked if everything was okay, and I already told you it was," said Dantek. "Everything included the oxygen." "Oh," said Hennessy. "Right." He was silent for a while, watching the water illuminated by their running lights. Nothing alive anymore, or if there was, he wasn't seeing it. Floating through a dark, undifferentiated world. It was like his dream, he suddenly realized, which struck him as a very bad thing. "I have a headache," he said, as much to hear the sound of a voice as anything else. Dantek said nothing. "Do you have a headache too?" asked Hennessy. "As a matter of fact, I do," Dantek said, turning to him. "I've had a headache for days now." "So have I," said Hennessy. Dantek just nodded. "Stop talking," he said. Hennessy nodded back. He sat there, staring out at the blank expanse surrounding them and their craft, listening to the creaking of the hull as the pressure increased. There was something else, some other sound he was hearing. What was it? Almost nothing at all, but it was still there. It was there still, wasn't it? Just loud enough to hear, but not loud enough to interpret. What could it be? Do you hear something?" he asked Dantek. "I told you to stop talking," the other said. Did that mean he heard it or not? Why couldn't he just answer the goddamned question? He'd put it civilly enough, hadn't he? "Please," said Hennessy. "I just need to know if you hear..." Dantek reached out and cuffed him on the side of the head. He doesn't hear it, a part of Hennessy's mind told him. If he'd heard it, he'd be wondering about it too, which means that either it's something close to me near the instrument panel or... But the or, when he identified it, was too terrible to contemplate. So he bent forward, tilting his right ear toward the panel, bringing it close to each instrument, listening. He kept expecting Dantek to ask him what he was doing, but the man didn't say anything. Maybe he wasn't looking at him, or maybe he just didn't care, but in any case, there was nothing. The noise was still there, but it didn't grow any louder. Which meant, he realized, that the sound was in his head. As soon as he thought this, the noise became many noises, and these quickly became whispering voices. What were they saying? He was afraid he knew. He tried not to pay any attention, tried not to listen, and 2,000 meters, said Dantek. Yes, thought Hennessy. Pay attention to that, to your job. Don't think about the voices in your head. Do your job. Pull yourself together, man. The last thing you need is... Did you hear me, Hennessy? Said Dantek. Dantek asked. I heard you, said Hennessy, shaking his head. 2,000 meters, I'll contact Tanner. He called up the link. There was Tanner, very pixelated now. 2,000 meters, said Hennessy. There was a wait of about 3 seconds before Tanner replied. Repeat that, said Tanner, only it came out as a burst of static and then... Repeat that. 2,000 meters, said Hennessy again, slower this time. Roger, said Tanner, after the delay. Proceed. Another 1,000 meters, thought Hennessy. Maybe even a little less. They were more than halfway there. Once they were all the way down, he could occupy himself with running the drill. He'd have something to focus on. Everything would be okay. All he had to do was make it that much farther. Then they could bore down straight to the object as quickly as possible. They'd do as Tanner asked and take a small sample of it and get back up to the surface immediately. And then, if whatever it was worth taking, it would be out of his hands. He'd fly back to North America, to the North American sector, go back to his life, putting all of this out of his mind. If Tanner and Dredger Corp wanted to put together a full crew and excavate the object completely before other organizations got wind of it, that was their business. He'd be long out of it, long gone. If he thought about it that way, things weren't so bad. Maybe if he took short breaths, it would be better. Then he wouldn't use up the oxygen so quickly. He was still sweating. The sweat was still pouring off him, but he was giggling about it now. But he wasn't giggling about it now, excuse me. He was afraid. He was afraid of what was happening and afraid of Dantek. Hennessy, get a grip on yourself, he thought. Or rather, a part of him thought. Another part was screaming in his head over and over. Another part of him was trying to force that part down below decks and then batten the hatch down. But then there were also the parts that were speaking, or rather whispering. All the whispering going on within his head that he didn't even know for sure was him at all. Hennessy, the voices were whispering. Hennessy! As if trying to get his attention. They were both a part of him and not a part of him. A wave of pain flashed through his head. He grunted and pushed his thumbs hard into his temples, and then looked back at Dantek to see if he'd noticed. Dantek, he saw, was clutching his head as well, his face pale and pearled with sweat. He was grimacing. After a moment, his face slipped back into expressionlessness and straightened. And he straightened, met Hennessy's gaze. What are you looking at? He growled. Without a world? Oh. Head's getting a bit swimmy. Let me have something to eat here real quick. 1 second. I've got some flour tortillas left over from my lunch that I could just kind of chew on. This music is just really, really intense for, like, more or less nothing happening. Nothing happening right now, at least. I gotta say, I completely forgot that Michael Altman isn't in this part. That it's just these two chuckle fucks. Well, not just these two chuckle fucks. We also have several other chuckle fucks. It's a regular chuckle fuck convention. Chuck fuck con. None of that sounded good. Without a word, Hennessy turned back to his control panel, hoping it had been longer, but not sure if any time at all had gone by. Maybe they still had 900 meters to go. How many meters? He asked in as flat and non-committal a voice as possible. He watched the distorted, ghostly reflection of Dantek's face in the observation porthole. The man looked deranged. "I'll tell you when it's time," Dantek said. There was a slight tremor to his voice now, unless Hennessy was imagining it. Maybe, thought Hennessy, it's as bad for him as it is for me. On one level, the thought was comforting. On another, it made him realize that things might be much worse than he thought. He kept looking out the observation portholes, sometimes watching the murky water, sometimes watching Dantek's phantom reflection. How much longer, he thought. How much longer? He shook his head. Hennessy, the voices said. Hennessy. They were voices he recognized, but he wasn't sure from where, and then he realized they were the voices he'd heard in his dream. But one in particular was even more familiar. He knew who it was, he was certain, but he couldn't picture a face to go along with the voice. How could you hear a voice and know it was familiar and still not know who it was? They've gotten into my head, he thought. I must have done something to let them into my head. Something is wrong with me. Oh God, he thought. Please help me. If he started screaming again, Dantek would kill him. He'd said as much. There was a flash of something outside the bathyscaphe, down below them. Ugh, excuse me. No, wait, he thought. It's just Dantek's reflection. It's nothing. But there it was again, coming out of the gray, something lighter, slightly textured. The ocean floor. He slowed the bathyscaphe until it was moving at a snail's pace. 3,000 meters, said Dantek. We're almost there, he told Dantek, his voice suddenly confident again. We're almost at the bottom. Heh. Bottom. He watched it approach. It was as barren as the moon, a thick layer of muck extending in all directions. They settled down very softly, raising almost no sediment. A flatfish that had been lying in the dust flicked its body and glided away, slowly settling again just outside the lights. In practice runs, there had been a fear that the craft would roll in landing, and they'd have to struggle to right her, but she came down smooth and even. We've made it, he said to Dantek. Should be easy from here on out. Dantek just stared. Hennessy contacted Tanner. Strangely enough, the signal here was better than it had been at 1,000 meters higher up, perhaps because of the new angle of the craft, though there were momentary pulses of energy that fuzzed everything out. We made it, he said once Tanner was on. What's it look like? Tanner asked. Smooth? Flat? He said. First layer, anyway, shouldn't be too difficult to dig through. Looks like the end of the world, muttered Dantek from behind him. Tanner nodded. Say? Say? He asked. I'm sorry, sir, I missed that first part, said Hennessy. It doesn't matter, said Tanner. Proceed when ready, and good luck. Hennessy put out the struts for stability and to elevate the back half of the craft. The drill angled down until it was touching the ocean floor. He readied the controls. Oop. Did I mute myself somehow? I wasn't muted for like that whole, like... I wasn't muted that whole time, was I? Did I like accidentally mute myself? Was I muted for reading the chapter? Do I need to read the chapter again? Oh boy. Okay. Ah, shit. That sucks. Okay. God damn it. When I started the board thingy. Did you hear me talking about, proceed when ready, good luck, put out the struts for stability to elevate the back half of the craft, drill angle down until it was touching the ocean floor, ready the controls? I genuinely, like, it could have fucked up when I accidentally fucked up the, I was trying to get ready to type, and I kind of fucked up the font. Oh, shit. Okay, hold on. There's a way for me to find out. 1 second. Hold on. Twitch, please. Oh my god. Why is it like this? Okay, hold on. I think I should be able to just kind of like scrub backwards here in like the clip editor and just make sure. If it'll let me. I don't know what's up with like Twitch on my phone right now. When I started the board thingy. Nope, it won't let me scrub back. Shit. Well. Fuck. Okay. So I got no way to know for sure unless I like stop the stream entirely. Oh, god damn it. This is less than ideal. Okay. Fuck. I'm not sure what to do here. I think the best thing to do would be for me to basically speed read this chapter again. And if I was in fact audible for the whole chapter. Well, the chapters are short, yeah, then again, you could just give a brief summary of what happened. I would feel weird about that. Like, I think the best thing to do would be for me to speed read the whole chapter. If I was in fact audible for the whole entire reading of the chapter, then fuck. Because I definitely muted myself at one point. I don't know how long it's been since I was muted. Fuck! Damn it. Okay, hold on. I'm going to have to stop the stream, go back, look at it, and then I'm just going to have to splice this afterwards. Fuck! Damn it. Okay, one second. We'll be... Okay. So the good news is that it does look like the actual issue with me muting did happen at the start of the recap section. So I don't need to reread the chapter, thankfully. And did probably coincide with the point at which I, what's the word I'm looking for? I fucked up the font for the notes. Okay, so where was I? All right, so both of them are losing it. Hennessy thinks drowning in his own sweat is absolutely hilarious. Dantek. Dantek is not quite as humorful of a person as Hennessy is, and nearly chokes the dude to death over him having a little giggle, mate. Hey, oi, you having a giggle? Bash your fucking head in this way on me mum. That's what he says. He says that verbatim, word for word even. He doesn't. I'm making that up. That's a joke. But eventually, like, they check in a couple times. They, with like every 1,000 meters, and eventually they hit the bottom. But all this time, Hennessy's not doing so hot. I need to get this fucking tortilla out of my goddamn way. Here we go. Hennessy is having some symptoms, having a symptom or two, having a symptom with the boys, and is just barely holding it together. Dantek is pretty on edge, seemingly kind of paranoid, but honestly, that might just be, like, normal for him. Like, he just seems like that kind of person. But he does mention that he has a headache, and that he's had a headache for days. He doesn't really want to talk about it, though. He's probably one of those people that thinks, like, oh, if I show weakness, this skinny nerd will get on my case or some shit. Like, somebody who, like, exudes some degree of just, like, I'm a big badass, but also no, don't look at me when I show weakness. Can't show weakness. I'm going to be a badass. So, yeah. It is now time to drill. Finally. We've been talking about it for like, let's see, 11, 12, 13, 14. We've been talking about it for like 4 chapters. And now, in chapter 15, we're finally going to penetrate this hole. So let's get started. He felt a hand on his shoulder. Or, chapter 15. He felt a hand on his shoulder, turned to see Dantek there, out of his seat and swaying, his eyes glazed over. I'll run the drill, he said. But I'm the one... Dantek squeezed and a sharp pain shot to his shoulder and neck. One of his arms went suddenly numb. I'll run the drill, said Dantek again, voice like flint. Move. It was a struggle to get the seat belt unbuckled with Dantek squeezing his shoulder, but in the end, he managed. He stood up. Dantek was still holding on to him, but he made his way to the other seat. Only once he was sitting and buckled in did Dantek let go. Hennessy breathed a sigh of relief and began massaging his shoulder with his fingers. Slowly, feeling began to come back into his arm. He stared resentfully at Dantek. "You hardly know what you're doing," he said. "You're going to get us both killed." "Shut up," said Dantek, not even bothering to turn around to look at him. He powered up the drill and started it going. The whole craft shook. With a jerk, they slowly began to burrow into the muck. The F-7 performed better than expected, digging slowly but inexorably downward, the drill gouging a path forward and the pulverizers decreasing the debris. At first it was mainly mud and silt, particulate matter that had filtered downward over the years. It was easy to dig through, but there was also very little for the drill to grab, so going was slow. The real question, thought Hennessy, looking out at the back through the navigation porthole and the way the tunnel was already filling up, was how easy it would be to get out again. The pulverizers were definitely getting rid of some of the debris, but not all of it, and they could very well get stuck if they just tried to reverse out the way they'd gone in. They'd either have to dig a circle and try to rejoin the tunnel. Either that or just dig a second tunnel going up. As long as Dantek was careful, it'd be okay. "Dropship, can you hear me?" he heard Dantek say. "Dropship?" All Hennessy heard on his own earpiece was static. He assumed from the fact that Dantek didn't continue speaking that he was hearing the same. "Just the two of them. At least for the moment. And me," said a voice within his head before scuttling away. Just like, "And me." He groaned. The F-7 lurched a bit. The sound the drill was making changed. They hit something harder. Marl, he guessed, from what he'd seen of the geological maps. Calcium carbonate and mudstone. He'd be able to check the readings and the exact composition if he were in the chair he was supposed to be in. He checked the readouts, looking over Dantek's shoulder. They seemed to be on track. So far, nothing to worry about.
"Now listen to me," said the voice in his head. "Before you're done, you listen to me."
I shouldn't be giving it this voice. Can you imagine? That's just the voice that people hear in the head when the marker is communicating with them.
"You should definitely turn into a horrible zombie. Oop, don't get your limbs cut off."
It's fucking Gollum ass. The fuck was I talking about? Okay, let's take this again with a bit more of a serious flair to it. "You'll listen to me," said the voice in his head. "Before you're done, you'll listen to me." "I'm busy," he said aloud. He shook his head. He bit the insides of his mouth until he tasted blood, hoping that would distract him from the voice he was hearing. For a moment, it did. "What?" said Dantek. "Pardon?" "What did you say?" "Oh, that," Hennessy said. "Sorry, I wasn't talking to you." He held still, phasing out a little bit, listening to the hum of the drill, feeling the bathyscaphe shiver around him. "I'm not here," he started telling himself at one point. "This is all a dream. Nothing but a dream." He leapt into awareness again as the craft jerked and the sound of the drill changed again. The F-7 slowed considerably. He turned and plastered his face to the rear navigation porthole, trying to see the side of the tunnel. Darker rock now. Breccia amalgam, and andesite glass. Here and there traces of shocked quartz, due to an impact. "We must be getting close," he said to Dantek. Dantek grunted. 50 or so meters to the tip of the target, he said. "It'll take some time still. You'll have to be patient." Be patient, he thought. He couldn't promise anything, but he would try. All they could ask of him was that he try. Then suddenly the drill stopped and the oxygen recirculator died. The lights flickered out and the readouts on the control panels were reduced to lines of static. Not even the emergency lights were working. He heard it in his ears, for just an instant, Tanner's voice, his tone, terse. "Do you read? And then nothing but dead air. In the silence, he listened to the sound of Dantek, pressing buttons, trying to work the controls. Nothing. His hands, he suddenly realized, were doing the same. "What's happened?" he asked, almost screaming it. "I don't know," said Dantek. "It's not working." Hennessy felt the porthole and started pounding on it. "Stop it," said Dantec. "Whatever you're doing, stop it." The darkness was thick all around him, too thick. He could already feel it tightening his fingers around his throat. The air already growing warm and then hot. It was more than he could stand, and then suddenly it got worse. There, briefly illuminated on the other side of the porthole, was a face. At first he thought it was his own face, but it was pitch dark. How could it be his own face? Or maybe a deep water fish? Something with its own luminescence? But no, it was a human face, not a fish. He was sure it was not his own face. It's Seaman. What he's seeing is popular Dreamcast game Seaman. Or Seaman from popular Dreamcast game Seaman. It was there, just on the other side of the glass, pressed between the glass and the wall of the tunnel they had just dug, glowing softly. And it was a face he knew, a puffy and slightly pudgy face, curly hair that floated in the water, a somewhat slack mouth, crooked teeth. He and the face shared the same eyes, their father's eyes. It was his half-brother, Shane. My neck is stiff. Shane had been dead for years. He had died in college, a freak accident when he'd been driving down the highway and a restraint broke on an automobile transport vehicle in front of him, sending a car crashing off its top level to crush him. Hennessy was sure he was dead. He'd seen the body. Even seen, when the Undertaker was looking the other way, how if you grabbed Shane's hair and tilted the head, a huge, bloodless gash opened up just under the collar. No, it was impossible. Hennessy, I want to point out here that even if your brother wasn't dead, it would also be impossible for him to be down here. Like, the fact that he's dead is probably not the most impossible thing about this situation. And yet, there he was. "Hello, Jim," Shane mouthed. Hennessy heard the words sound aloud within his head. "Hello, Shane," he said. "What are you doing out here?" "Shut up," said Dantec. "What's wrong with you? Shut up." "It's good to see you again, Jim," said Shane. Hennessy put his face very close to the glass. "I have to be quiet," he whispered. "If I don't, Dantec's going to throw a conniption." Shane nodded and smiled, then pretended, as they had done when they were kids, to be zipping his mouth shut. "I have to be honest, Shane," Hennessy whispered. He couldn't see his own face in the darkness, but he imagined his forehead to be wrinkled with worry. Hopefully Shane could see that and would take the question in the spirit it was intended. "I thought you were dead." "Of course you did, Jim," said Shane. "That's what they wanted you to think." Hennessy nodded. "Those bastards," he whispered. Shane nodded. "They're not that bad," he said. "They just don't know any better. But you know better, don't you, Jim?" "I do now," whispered Hennessy. "God, Shane, it's really great to see you, but I have to ask you another question." "Go ahead," said Shane. "You can ask me anything." "What are you doing out there?" "Well," said Shane, looking down shyly, "to be frank, Jim, I was hoping you'd invite me in." Hennessy looked around at the darkness, trying to picture in his mind what the cabin looked like. "Shane, it's already pretty cramped in here. I don't know if there's room." "Trust me, there's more room than you think," said Shane. "Invite me in, and you'll see." "But what will Dantec think?" he asked. "Stop whispering!" shouted Dantec. "Stop it now!" Shane gave him a sleepy grin. "He's not the boss here, Jim. I know how things really are. You're the boss. Dantec, he's just a big bully. He needs someone to put him in his place. I'll be quiet. I bet he won't even notice me." "You're right, Shane," whispered Hennessy. "He's nothing more than a big bully." He waited, pressing his face against the thick glass of the porthole. "Why not, then? Come on in, Shane. Come on in." With that, suddenly the lights flickered and went out again, then came on in full force. The readouts went live again. Hennessy heard crackling in his ear, saw Tanner's ghost on the hollow screen before it was rubbed out by static. The oxygen recirculator started up and the drill began to hum. Dantec gave a whoop. We're okay, he said, casting a quick glance over his shoulder. His face, Hennessy saw, was slick with sweat. We're going to be okay. But Hennessy already knew it would be okay. His brother, good old Shane, was here now, sitting right beside him on a chair he hadn't remembered being there before. Shane must have brought it with him. He was smiling, holding Hennessy's hand in his own. Now that Shane was there, everything would work out. Uh-huh. Everything's gonna be okay. Where did this chapter start again? What page was it? Hold on. There we go. Okay. Famous last words. You can say that again. Oh, hold on. I gotta pause the video. There we go. So we're drilling now. So as our good buddy Hennessy, whose first name is apparently James. I don't know if we had his like first name up until this point, or it's Jim rather, which could be short for anything. Could be James. Could be Jimothy. Could be Jimbert. Jimbrodak. Anyway, as he describes it, the way that it works is that the drill mashes up like whatever sort of like sediment or rock that they're drilling through, and then there's what's called pulverizers, which basically reduce the debris to nothing to prevent them from like taking damage or getting buried in, at least buried in too considerably. Now, one of the major things that happens here is that Dantec decides to take over for drilling. Which is odd, because Hennessy was brought in to be sort of like the main pilot here, and Dantec was more the backup, more than anything. So Hennessy's not a huge fan of this, because he wanted to dwill. He wanted to be the dwill boy. But no, Dantec is desperate to be the drill boy, for some reason. I don't know why. He's just like that, I guess. So they get going, and Hennessy's just like keeping track of like, okay, how far in are we? What sort of rocks are outside? What are we drilling through? How well is the drill working? Let's keep an eye on the console. And then suddenly, pew, power goes out. Now, obviously, this is less than ideal. This is a less than ideal situation to be in. Dantec's freaking out. He's not a huge fan of this. He's big scaled, which is interesting for a character like him, considering that he's supposed to be like this super badass military man's just big soldier boy up in there. Oh, watch me crank it. Okay, I don't remember the lyrics to that. So him being, like, frightened is admittedly kind of a big deal and probably indicative of how dire the situation is. Hennessy's doing fine, though, because Hennessy has his brother there to comfort him. Shane's here, everybody. Good old Shane. Our good pal, good buddy Shane is here to make everything A-okay. If it's not super clear or anything, Shane is a hallucination beamed into Hennessy's head from the marker. The fact that he is outside a submersible thousands of meters below the surface of the water is a pretty good indication. So Shane's talking to Hennessy about how, like, hey man, listen, you gotta let me in. You should definitely invite me in there. I really wanna take a ride in the bathyscaphe along with y'all. I think it'd be super cool. I think it'd be real neat if you let me just take a little old seat beside you. Shane came back and was like, look man, I'm the king of Atlantis. Let me in. Basically, yeah. Like, hey, you're my bona fides. You're my bona fides. Let me into the bathyscaphe. I know. We've drilled through thousands of feet of rock. And it's weird for me to be here. But look, is it any weirder than, like, fish? Like regular ass fish? How they breathe underwater? Who really knows? It's one of the great mysteries of life, really. And this all makes perfect sense to Hennessy, of course, because Hennessy's losing his fucking mind. But in the end, he's just like, yeah, Shane, you can go ahead and come in. And then, suddenly, the bathyscaphe just turns back on. Weird how that works out, huh? And Dantek is just so excited about this. He's super jazzed that it's back up and working and that they can continue on. He doesn't even seem to mind that there is a whole-ass new person inside the bathyscaphe. But maybe, just maybe, that's because he can't actually see this whole new person. But Hennessy can. And isn't that what matters in the end? That Hennessy can see it? Yeah. I'm sure only good things will happen from here on out. Let's continue on and see, shall we? Chapter 16. He gently disengaged his hand from his brother's and looked at his chronometer. 6:38, it read, but he could tell by the way the numbers flashed and then slowly faded that it had stopped. Why wasn't it working? He showed it to Shane, who just nodded. Nothing to worry about, brother, Shane said. It doesn't really matter. Shane was right, of course. It didn't really matter, but he still wanted to know what time it was. What time is it? He asked Dantek. Leave me alone, said Dantek. We're getting close. I have to watch this. Hennessy waited a moment and then asked again. Distractedly, Dantek looked at his wrist, then held his chronometer to his ear. It's stopped, he said. Mine too, said Hennessy. Dantek turned and looked at him. He didn't seem to notice Shane even though he was right there, right next to Hennessy. People see what they want to see, thought Hennessy. Doesn't that seem weird to you? Dantek asked. Hennessy shrugged. Nothing to worry about, he said. It doesn't really matter. Dantek narrowed his eyes. And another thing, he said. Why are you so fucking serene all of a sudden? Hennessy cast his eyes towards Shane, then realized what he'd done and flicked them back quickly to look at Dantek. Dantek's eyes moved to the side, stared through Shane, then moved back. It's just like that, said Hennessy. I just feel better. I don't know why. Rolling his eyes, Dantec turned away. Just between you and me, Jim. Should he really be doing this? Asked Shane. I don't know, said Hennessy. Should he? Some things it's better not to mess with. Hennessy nodded. Shane was probably right, but if he told Dantec that, he wouldn't listen. What could he do about it? Maybe it was a bad idea, but even if it was, he didn't know how he could get Dantec to stop. After a few more minutes, or maybe it was longer, impossible to say, Dantec slowed the drill. He drilled forward slowly until they struck something, and the drill made a whining sound. He reversed it, backed up a little, and then approached it at a slightly different angle, shearing away the side of the tunnel wall. Hennessy just stayed smiling, glancing occasionally over at his brother, waiting. Are you sure it's a good idea? Asked Shane again. Hennessy shrugged. Dantec backed up again, came in once more, then a fourth time. I think it's a mistake, Shane said. There was, Hennessy could see, a strange shape, still half enclosed in rock on one side. It was hard to see past the particles of rock and silt swirling through the water. Dantec pulled back a little, then turned off the drill. What's out there? Asked Hennessy. How the hell should I know? Said Dantec. I've never seen anything like it before. It's the black marker, said Shane. The black marker, Hennessy thought. As the water settled, he began to see it more clearly. It looked like a monolith made of some sort of obsidian. It narrowed at a point at the top, the whole of it twisting slightly as it rose. It was horizontally striated and covered with thousands of symbols. Symbols unlike anything he had seen before. Were they glowing? Or did it only look like they were because of the way the light was catching them? He couldn't tell for sure. What he could see of it, of the part that was uncovered now, was probably 3 meters tall. Oh my god, said Dantec, his voice filled with an uncustomary awe. Who put this here? Or what? That's the last question you want to ask, said Shane to Hennessy. Better not to know. He remembered suddenly the schematic that Tanner had shown them of the marker. He pulled it up on his holoscreen. There were 2 horns at the top, pointing out in either direction, and he could see the marker went on much deeper below them, probably another 20 meters or more. How big is it? Hennessy asked. Dantec, confused, said something, but Hennessy wasn't asking him. Big, said Shane. He moved Hennessy's hand to the porthole, pressed it against the glass. Together they stared out. You don't want to mess with this, Shane said. You're in danger. I'm going to move us closer, said Dantec. Are you sure? Asked Hennessy, still staring out. Maybe we shouldn't mess with it. Beside him, just at the edge of his peripheral vision, Shane nodded. Try calling Tanner, said Dantec. See what he wants us to do. Hennessy tried, but only got bursts of static. Little bits of Tanner's voice spliced into it like it had been torn apart. I don't know, said Hennessy. There's something seriously wrong here. Let's leave it alone. We came all this way, said Dantec. We've been in this coffin for hours. Now that we're here, we have to get a better look. Hennessy remained for a moment, staring at it, and finally nodded. It wouldn't hurt to get closer, I guess, he said. As long as we're careful. He looked over his shoulder at his brother, who was shaking his head. It just might, he said. Dantec eased the ship forward, then cut the engines. Let them drift. There they were, right up against it, the F-7 bumping softly against the marker's side. It's marvelous, Dantec whispered. It's not marvelous, said Shane, his face stretched into a strange rictus. It's horrible. Dantec is becoming one of them, brother. I'm afraid we're going to have to get rid of him. Whoop. Oop. So, Hennessy and Shane are just kind of hanging out now. You know, just sort of watching the rocks go by as Dantec is completely focused on just boring down as fast and as far as they possibly can. Now, Shane is implying that what they're doing right now is probably a bad idea. Which... Oh, and also, we have, like... Hold on. We have confirmation that this is, in fact, the black marker. I've been saying it this whole time because obviously it's the black marker. Of course it's the black marker. It's absolutely going to be the black marker. We have established in games at this point that the black marker was discovered by Michael Altman. It's the black fucking marker. But now someone has called it the black marker. Now, Shane seems to be implying that them being down there is maybe a bad idea. Which does feed into this pretty common thing within the context of Dead Space, where, like, basically, the exact nature of the marker, its effect on people, and what it makes them do is super unclear. Like, you get people who are just, like, become religiously obsessed with the marker, obviously. People who get hit with that marker signal and they're just like, oh, they need bodies. We need to make bodies. Let's make bodies. Let the bodies hit the floor. Let the bodies hit the floor. And then you get the people who are, like, basically, the marker makes a connection with and puts blueprints in their head to make more markers. And there seems to be a correlation between those people, just based on, like, Isaac Clarke himself. There seems to be a correlation between those people and people who seem to be warned not to mess with the markers, which is a little... like, okay. So the entire thing is that markers need to be created to channel the signal from the Brethren Moons into everyone around to crush, kill, murder as many people as possible, to make as many corpses as possible, make a hive mind, strengthen the connection to... and then, like, all come together as a hive mind, which then directs the necromorphs in a more organized fashion based on the signal from the Brethren Moons to eventually make enough corpses that convergence happens. With convergence, of course, being the convergence of all of those corpses into a new Brethren Moon. So you have to ask yourself, if that is the case, why is... why are we getting these mixed messages? Right? So, like, Hennessy is being told by this hallucination of Shane not to mess with the black marker. Similarly, in Dead Space 1, Isaac Clarke is guided by his hallucination of Nicole to reunite the red marker with its base and seal the hive mind. So it's just like, what's going on here? Why is it like this? Why would the marker seemingly simultaneously send out because it's established in Dead Space 2 that the signal that causes violent dementia in individuals, that causes them to kill everyone in sight in order to create more bodies that it can then turn into necromorphs, as well as the signal that connects with quote unquote smart people, and thus imbues them with the knowledge of how to create more markers, is all carried on the same wave. Like, why would this signal also induce a desire in those quote unquote smart people to avoid, stop, and like put an end to these machinations? Why does the red marker create a field of, appropriately referred to as, dead space around it that the necromorphs can't seemingly get close to? And that's why it needs to be reunited with the base, because that was what was keeping the hive mind sealed up inside Aegis 7. And personally, I think I've figured it out. The Brethren Moons are playing hard to get. They're just like, well, we can't just tell them we want them to bring about glorious convergence. We gotta make them want it. We gotta pretend, no, you gotta stop it. You gotta stop the markers from bringing about glorious convergence. Don't do that, no. It's not like I wanted you to bring about glorious convergence or anything, Baka. That's really like the best I can guess. Look, it's one of those things where it's just like the motivations and the methods of intellects vastly like larger and more complex than our own are entirely unknowable to us. They're eldritch horrors. We have no way of knowing why they do what they do. Only they know why they do what they do, and we can't really understand it. But at the same time, it feels like maybe they're playing a little hard to get. I really don't need the image of a hive mind and a Sailor Fuku blushing and saying Baka. No, you do need that. You do need that. We all need hive mind tan in our lives. Oh boy. If anything comes of this stream, it needs to be a shy, blushing necromorph hive mind trying to pretend like it wasn't looking at you from across the classroom. It's not like it likes you or anything. Oh god. Oh fuck. Oh Christ, that needs to be a clip. I'm gonna make a highlight of that later. Woo! Alright. Okay. We got some more book to get through. They've found the marker and oh, right. So Shane is just like, hey Hennessy, hey Jim, you should totally kill that guy. You should definitely kill that guy. He definitely needs to die. I mean, like, if he does, like, he's, like, because Dantec, Dantec's going a little marker drunk right now. He's a little infatuated with this thing. And it's just like, no, No, I don't like you. Go away. I'm gonna make this other guy kill you so you leave me alone. So Shane's just like, hey man, let me on. Kill that dude. Just fucking kill him. I'm sure you got something in here you can use, I'm sure. You take your shirt off, choke him out with it. Maybe there's something sharp. You can break off a lever, shove it in his goddamn jugular. No one will miss him. He's an asshole. And that's where we leave off. So let's take a look at the next chapter. Chapter 17. I think this is where, this is about where the chapters start getting like really short. So it's a pretty quick jaunt to the end of this part, which is where we're going to go ahead and stop for the day once we get there. So far, so good, thought Dantek, or good enough anyway. He'd probably make it through. His head had been aching ever since he got into the goddamn sub, or if he was to be honest with himself, for weeks now. Pills didn't seem to help. Whatever he did, it was still there. Not unbearable, just always throbbing quietly, keeping him from sleeping, destroying his concentration. He hadn't felt so strung out since the moon skirmishes. For that matter, he hadn't felt this confined, this trapped since then. He hadn't realized how much being in a sub underwater was going to feel like being in a jettison pod in space. Hold on. I almost forgot to start this back up. It brought all sorts of things flashing back at him from the moon skirmishes. That weird war that wasn't officially a war, where all it took was one little tear in the fabric of your suit for you to die, and where, by the end, if you wanted to survive, you had to stab a knife in a buddy's back just so you could steal what was left of his oxygen. How many men had he had to kill just to stay alive? All that had changed him, hardened him. He thought at first that it had lifted him above things, had made it so he wouldn't feel fear, wouldn't be subject to the same emotional weaknesses as others, but he was beginning to realize that wasn't quite right. True, he'd managed to avoid those parts of himself for a long time, but they were still there. And now that they were forcing their way up to the surface, they were raw and red, more sensitive than an exposed nerve. And that bastard Hennessy. It didn't help being stuck with him. He was a real, genuine fucking chucklehead, and that was for sure. First, he had been like a kid in a toy shop, unable to contain his delight at the F7, at his new toy. Then, put him in the thing, and he does a Jekyll Hyde, becomes nothing but panic and nerves and slow collapse into madness. That was the last thing you wanted in a confined space like this. In the moon skirmishes, he'd killed men for less. Not like the thought didn't cross his mind, but Tanner didn't want him to do it. Tanner had been good to him over the years. Though if Tanner had understood what had really happened during the moon skirmishes, Dantek knew he might treat him a lot differently. During the skirmishes, Tanner never realized that Dantek was not interested in saving him so much as stealing his air supply. Dantek had planned to kill him and take his oxygen tank, and he would have done it too, except that while looking for a safe place to kill Tanner, he'd stumbled onto a working transmitter. A technician's severed and frozen arm still stuck to it. So instead of killing Tanner, he called the dropship to pick them up. Tanner never understood that the reason he blacked out and almost died before the ship arrived was because Dantek had turned the airflow on his tank down, just in case the ship didn't come fast enough and he needed Tanner's air after all. But loyalty and guilt toward Tanner weren't the only reason that Dantek hadn't killed Hennessy. He didn't like the idea of killing someone in such a confined space where he couldn't dispose of the body. He just couldn't imagine sitting there, knowing that the body was behind him, feeling its dead eyes on his back. Add to the fact that over the last 6 or so hours, he'd actually become a little afraid of Hennessy. Panicking, then whispering to himself, speaking to the bulkhead to his left and as if there was actually someone sitting beside him. The man was out of his mind, and Dantek didn't want to do anything to provoke him. He knew from personal experience that when people went out of their minds, they became unpredictable. They could do things you'd never expect, and they'd do them with a strength you'd never expect them to have. He just wanted to come through this alive. They'd made it halfway. They were right here now, right beside the monolith, which, he had to admit, also scared the shit out of him. But it filled him with awe as well. It had been there more than 50 million years, if the geological data was to be believed, which meant it predated humankind. But it was clearly man-made, or made by some intelligent life. It was mind-boggling. Hennessy was staring out the porthole at it, lost in contemplation of the thing, looking like his brain had been switched off. Dantek had the core sampler primed. It was ready and partly extended. He'd tested the molecular cutters that would slice into the stone. Carefully, he extended the arm until it was touching the monolith itself, and then he thrust it forward and started to cut. Almost immediately, his head was filled with a piercing pain. So intense, he felt he was going to pass out. His vision first seemed as though it had been coated in blood, and then it vanished entirely, being replaced by an empty white expanse. He gripped the control panel, struggling to breathe. Hennessy was screaming behind him. Very slowly, the pain began to ebb away. His vision crept back. Hennessy was moaning, all but passed out behind him. The core sampler had kept cutting, very slowly, but it was still cutting. All they needed was a little bit. Just a little bit. Then he could turn the F7 around and get the hell out of here. So again, a few short chapters now. But chapters nonetheless. So Dantek's kind of a big baby. He's kind of a big whiny baby. He's just like, no, I don't like this. I'm scared. I'm scared of this crazy man in this sub with me. He's talking to people on Dell. It scares me. I'm also scared of this big thing, the big molecule. He's not a fan. He's not a fan of any of it. He's also not a fan that he can't kill Hennessy. And it's not just so much that Tanner said he can't kill Hennessy. But it's also that, like... Did I spell bathyscaphe right? I think I did. Definitely didn't spell guy right there. He doesn't want to share this confined space, this bathyscaphe, with a dead guy. Which, you know, reasonable. Makes sense to me. As, like, a person with some fucking sense. So he cuts into the marker, right? And the marker doesn't like it. The marker is not a fan of being cut into. It sends out like a psychic attack that fills Dantek's head with just searing pain until everything goes white. White. And then everything just comes back and he's fine. And he's still cutting into it. But like, I guess the marker's cool with it now? Well, probably not, as I'm sure we'll find out in like upcoming chapters. But like, it's not actively attacking his mind anymore. So, I mean, he's got that going for him, which is nice. So let's see what happens next, shall we? Again, very short chapters, so we're probably not going to try to spend too much time talking about them. Just because we are coming up on time now. Bloop. Chapter 18. 1 minute, Hennessy was sitting there, looking at his brother, everything fine, and the next there was a piercing noise and his head felt like it was going to burst. His brother began to shake all over, his head tilted to the side, his neck tearing open just where it did when Shane had been killed. He shook more in a burst, and in a burst his body exploded, splattering everything with blood. Hennessy began to scream and suddenly couldn't breathe. A moment later, the ship around him was spinning, and then darkness. When he came to, Shane was back, looking just as he had before he dissolved into a burst of blood. The same strange, fixed expression on his face. He'd moved, though, and was now sitting next to Dantek, facing the other way, looking back at Hennessy. Or not next to Dantek exactly, he seemed to be sitting, so it seemed partly on Dantek. As Hennessy pulled himself up, he saw. Shane was partly in Dantek, their hips fused together, his legs somehow jutting through the back of the command chair. "You're all right?" asked Hennessy. "Yes," said Dantek, "except for my head. And you?" "He shouldn't be doing this," said Shane, his mouth moving soundlessly in the air like a fish out of water. "It's dangerous. Looking's bad enough, but touching is too much. Neither of you should be doing this, Jim. I thought you were better than that." "Doing what?" asked Hennessy. "I'm taking a core sample, of course," said Dantek. "What did you expect me to be doing?" "This is not something to be examined," said Shane. "This is not something to be understood. It needs to be left alone and untouched, where it's been lying undisturbed for millions of years. Do you think they would have buried it this deep if it was meant to be found? What does it do? Hennessy asked. Dantek still wasn't looking at him. It's a molecular cutter with a titanium cylinder behind it, he said. The circular cutter makes a round hole and pushes slowly in. Once the cylinder is far enough in, the cutters rotate to shear off the edge of the end of the sample. I thought you knew all that. Don't worry, it's not much longer. We're almost done. You don't want to know what it does, said Shane. You shouldn't try to destroy it. You shouldn't listen to it. You should just leave it alone. You must resist convergence, Jim. Convergence? What? Said Dantek, half turning around. I guess that, yes, the molecular beams converge in a manner of speaking, but why are you so interested? Not to mention the convergence, said Shane. The last thing you want to do is get that started. He stretched uncomfortably in his chair. Be careful how you move, said Hennessy to Dantek. You don't want to tear Shane apart. Okay, so this chapter starts with us seeing a reaction of, or seeing how Hennessy and Shane reacted to the first incision into the marker. And basically, Shane fucking blows up and then acts like he don't know nobody. Well, it's not accurate to say that that's all that really happens. The first thing that happens is that the exact injury that killed him appears on his body first. And then he explodes into bloody chunks. And then there's just like a bright white light, everything goes dark, and then Shane's back. But Shane is clipping into Dantek now. They seem to, like, they're sharing a seat, but, like, Shane is, like, inside Dantek's geometry. Their hips apparently fuse together. And Shane is trying to warn Shane, or the marker through Shane, I guess the marker through Shane, is trying to warn Hennessy against convergence, which, as established as of, like, Dead Space 3 and kind of Dead Space 2, is like an actual physical convergence of dead mass into a Bedouin moon. Now, Dantek the whole time thinks that Hennessy is talking to him and asking him about the process that he's using to use a coring laser to extract a sample from the marker. Now, the coring laser that he's using, I don't think is the same one as is in the mobile game. The mobile game has a weapon called the corer. It's kind of similar to the contact beam, though I think its alt fire is slightly different, and it is exclusive, I believe, to the mobile game. But I don't think it's the same thing, though if it was, it wouldn't surprise me, given what we've previously discussed about, like, the technology in the Dead Space universe having kind of, like, stagnated over the course of, like, 200 to 300 years. It would not necessarily surprise me if, say, a coring device that they used back when the black market was first found is still the exact same as it is, like, 300 years later. So eventually, Hennessy does say something to Dantek, and he tells Dantek to be careful lest he rip Shane apart, because the two of them are currently fused together. So this is the first time... Oh, hold on. Hold on. So this is the first time that Shane has kind of like directly confirmed, or Hennessy has directly confirmed Shane's presence to Dantek. So let's find out how that goes from Dantek's perspective. I bet it goes great. Chapter 19. Oh shit, thought Dantek. He turned fully around to face Hennessy, who immediately started screaming. Shane! Hennessy screamed. Shane! The blood! The blood! He's all over everything! He's all over you! Making gagging sounds, he started rubbing his hands up and down Dantek's chest, a terrible expression on his face. We have to get him off, he said, and cast Dantek a desperate look. Can't you see it? He asked. Can't you see the blood? Dantek slapped him hard enough to knock him down. Just calm down, said Dantek. He was shaking. Just relax. Easy for you to say, Hennessy was muttering. It isn't your brother who just burst. Hennessy, said Dantek. It wasn't your brother either. It's just you and me here. And Hennessy was shaking his head. I saw him, he was saying. I saw him. His voice was more and more hysterical. He was right. He was here. I swear, right here. Right there, where you're sitting. There. But that's me, said Dantek, starting to get really frightened. How could he be sitting here if I was here the whole time? He was, said Hennessy. He was halfway inside you. You tore him and then he burst. Oh, shit, thought Dantek again. Try to get a hold of yourself, Hennessy, he said, keeping his voice level. You're imagining things. We have to stop, said Hennessy. Shane told me. We have to leave it alone. We have to bury it and get the hell out of here. Stop the core sampler. He was screaming now. Put it back. It's okay, said Dantek. I'll stop it, he said. I'm stopping it now, he claimed. He reached out for the controls and then hesitated. It was nearly through, the sample nearly extracted. Just a few seconds more and they'd have it. Then they could get the hell out of here. Stop it, raved Hennessy. Stop it! I am stopping it, lied Dantek. Don't shout, you're confusing me. It's almost done, I swear. And it was done. For at that moment, the molecular cutters finished and the core sampler began to withdraw its sample in the extraction cylinder. There. You see? Said Dantek. Everything's okay. He turned around, smiling, just in time to have his jaw broken by a metal bar. He raised his arm, felt the pain as the bar struck him there as well. He half slid, half fell out of the command chair. He saw the bar hit and crumple the armrest just above his head. It was a strut from the oxygen recirculator. He wondered how Hennessy had disassembled it so quickly. He kicked out, watched Hennessy lurch to one side and stumble against the bulkhead. Dantek started to scramble up, but his arm wouldn't support him. Blood was pouring out of his mouth and down his chest. He managed to heave himself onto his feet, but Hennessy had already recovered and was coming at him, bringing the bar down. He raised the broken arm and Hennessy struck again, the pain this time so intense that his vision faded to a dark blur. He slipped in his own blood and was down again, and then Hennessy struck him in the head. As he lay there, the life leaking out of him, he began to feel people crowding around him. It was impossible. Even though he was dying, he knew it wasn't possible. It was only he and Hennessy there, and even if it were possible, there were too many people to fit. But even though he was sure it couldn't be happening, it was unbearable that it was. Particularly when he recognized the faces. They were all men he had been with in the moon skirmishes. Men who not only had died, but died by his hand, so that he could take their oxygen and survive. One by one, they came forward, while Hennessy continued to batter him with the iron bar, kneeling beside him, and then leaning over him to suck the breath out of his mouth. When the last one finally came, he died. So, Dantek's fucking dead. What a twist. He was... You see, it's ironic because he was the one who planned to kill... Who was prepared to kill Hennessy, but then Hennessy ended up killing him. So, right from the start, Dantek's first issue, or his first mistake, was moving in his seat. Now, Hennessy is obviously pretty upset about this. He already saw his brother's dead body once. Well, technically at this point, twice, given that he burst into a fucking splattering of blood not a few minutes ago when they actually started drilling or coring the fucking marker. But perhaps seeing him ripped to pieces for like a third time is maybe... He's maybe not going to have the best reaction to that. Let's see. How's Hagar spelled? Like the guy from, like, Final Fight? Hold on. Is it Haggar? Yeah, it is. Okay. So he manages to get a pipe off of the oxygen recirculator, which might not be the one you want to, the sort of thing you want to take apart in the middle of a fucking submersible, but you know, I'm sure he was kind of light on options. And the first thing that Dantek mentions happening, or that this chapter mentions happening to Dantek, is that his jaw is broken. But from the sound of things, it might be a little bit more accurate to say that his jaw is broken the fuck off. Because he mentions like blood pouring out of his mouth. So it sounds like it's not just that the jaw is broken, but quite possibly that his jaw is at the very least partially torn from his fucking face. Dantek manages to get at least one good hit in on Hennessy, but then starts slipping in his own blood like a fucking idiot. What a loser. And Hennessy manages to get a few more good whacks with this pipe. So, as Dantek lays there dying, he gets the fucking breath vacuumed out of him by, like, all the people that he killed in the moon skirmishes so that he himself wouldn't run out of oxygen. Again, ironic. Quite ironic. The marker's all about dramatic irony like this. Or karmic irony, I guess? Is more what it... Like, this isn't dramatic irony. Because dramatic irony is when we know something about the narrative, but the character doesn't know. And it's important. So this wouldn't be dramatic irony necessarily. Although I guess it is kind of dramatic irony because we know that the marker is bad news. And we know the specific reasons that it's bad news and these guys don't. But mostly I think it's just karmic. It's supposed to be like a karmic sort of irony. So Dantek is dead tech. And that's where the chapter ends. Now the question is, how the fuck is Hennessy gonna get back with just him, and he's out here losing his fucking mind? Perhaps we will find out in chapter 20. Yep. Oh, I left the video going. Whoopsie doodles. Alright. Chapter 20. He dropped the iron bar, exhausted, and limped back to his chair. He wiped the blood off his face with his sleeve and closed his eyes. It was only after sitting there like that for a few moments, his breath gradually slowing, that he started to realize what he'd just done. He opened his eyes and saw the mess on the floor and retched. It was barely recognizable as a human form anymore. The limbs twisted and turned in the wrong directions. The head flattened out and split open up on the top. It was much worse than when his brother had exploded. He looked away. Had he done that? How? Dantek was a skilled and seasoned fighter, much stronger than he was. When Dantek had grabbed his shoulder, he'd been paralyzed with pain. No, he couldn't have done this. He couldn't have gotten away with it. But if not him, then who? And where was his brother? Was this really happening, or was it just what they wanted him to believe? Shane? He said. His comlink suddenly crackled. Tanner's voice, unless it was someone pretending to be Tanner. Eat me. Please. Spawn. Hannah. He went to the screen, which was now spattered with blood. Tanner, he said. I've lost Shane. Ah, said Tanner. Hennessy saw his face for just a minute on the scanner, looking grim, then a startled expression crossed Tanner's face, and he was drowned out in static. Hennessy turned away from the control panel to see, just behind him, his brother. Shane, he said and smiled. You're all right after all. Of course I am, Jim, he said. You don't think a little thing like that could hurt me, do you? It must have been a trick, Hennessy told himself. His brother leaned against the control panel and stared down at him. I need to speak seriously with you, Jim, he said. What is it, Shane? Asked Hennessy. You know you can talk to me about anything. His dead brother looked straight at him, his face thoughtful, just as it had often been before when they were younger. You did good, brother. You stopped him, said Shane. But this is a very dangerous time. You are too close. Too close to be able to hear clearly. The whispers, they may take you. You mustn't listen to them, Jim. Get free. Stay clear. Keep your mind to yourself. Or you may be no more. Tell all the others the same. But I don't... Hennessy stuttered, groping for words. I have to be honest, Shane. I'm not sure I understand exactly what you're talking about. Let them know, said Shane. The marker is the past, and the past must remain undisturbed if we are to continue as we are. You have already awakened it. It calls out for you even now. But you must not obey. You must not listen. Tell them that. Who am I supposed to tell? Asked Hennessy. Everybody, said Shane. Tell everybody. But why don't you tell them, Shane? He asked. You know so much more about it than I do. But Shane just shook his head. It's already begun, he said. He reached out and touched his thumb to Hennessy's forehead. His touch burned like ice. And then, as Hennessy watched, his brother slowly faded and was gone. Oh, hold on. I didn't pause the video. Whoop. Okay. So Hennessy finally has his moment of clarity, but it's not a particularly strong moment of clarity. He realizes that, oh shit, Dantek is dead. Did I do that? And he kind of tells himself, no, there's no way I could have done that. I couldn't have possibly have done that. Dantek was a trained killer. Dantek was ready to kill me. He was like super strong and buff. He's like, he was like a total badass. There's no way I could have done this. Someone else must have done this. Maybe it was my dead brother who is now alive again somehow. Hey, bro. So Shane reappears again. He seems to be doing that a lot. And Hennessy is also starting to kind of become a little bit more paranoid, referring now to a nebulous they. So, like, they want him to think it's Tanner. It must have been a trick. They must have done something. This sounds like drunk history, but with fiction. I like recapping stories a lot. I have a lot of fun with it, so this is great for me, doing these little recaps after each chapter. It's good. It's good. I'm not even drunk. I'm a little tired. My energy drink is wearing off a little bit, but other than that, like, I'm feeling fine. It is 3:43 in the afternoon. And like, I already don't drink. I don't know that I would be drinking this early. We did have Mexican today. I could have gotten a margarita if I wanted to, if I drank, but I don't drink, you see. I'm not much of a drinker. Don't really like alcohol or anything that alters my state of mind, really. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah. So, Shane is just like, hey, bro, check it. Don't let anybody back near the marker. He doesn't really elaborate too much on, like, why. Also, hello, Scarlet Dye. We're just about done here. I've got, like, one more chapter to read, but it's good to have you. Thanks for coming to the Sharkstream. He doesn't really elaborate as to why we should be leaving the marker alone, but, like, it sounds like it's bad. It sounds like it's not good. It's a bad time. Don't touch that mark. Don't touch that dial, folks. Don't do it. Don't touch the marker. Kya. Why did I put that there? Anyway. So he presses a thumb to Hennessy's head, and poof, he's gone. And now Hennessy is just hanging out in a bathyscaphe with a dead guy. So, that's fun. You know, just hanging out with your dead pal. I heard don't touch the marker, Altman be praised. What's that? Do touch the marker? Well, if you insist. No. Like I said, Brethren Moon's playing hard to get. Okay. That was a pretty short chapter, so the next one is actually a little bit longer. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5... about 5-ish pages. And that brings us to the end of part 3. So let's go ahead and get this finished up today. Shall we? Chapter 21. He felt bereft and very lonely. He went to the observation porthole, slipping on the carcass on the floor on the way. Somebody should move that, he thought. The whole cabin reeked of blood. Maybe Shane's out there, he thought, like he was before. But all he could see was the murky water, cut through by the light and the edge of the marker. Yes, it was definitely glowing now, its light pulsing slightly. He stared at it. It was trying to tell him something. What had Shane said? That it had to be left alone? That they didn't need to understand it? But why, then, did he feel like he wanted to understand it? Like he wanted to learn from it? Maybe Shane had been wrong. Serenade the red violent rock with your sweet tones of weird religion, gargle noises. No, unitology doesn't exist yet. This is unitology origins. He stared and stared. For a moment, he felt he could hear a voice again. Maybe Shane's voice. But then it grew softer and softer, and it was gone. Somebody's scratching at my door. I think my cats want in. One or more of them. Let's see who it is. Let's see who's a-scratching at the door real quick. Who's that scratching at the door? Ba, 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 ba. Do, 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 do. Hi, Mitty. Did you want to come in? It's okay. Take your cautious steppies. Hey, everybody. Calamity's here. Hello, Calamity. Everybody say hi to Calamity. Calamity is going over to the window with the good sunbeams. Okay. Sits myself back down. Are we just at like a quiet point in the soundtrack? Oh yeah, we are. Okay, cool. Where was I? All right. Stared and stared for a moment. He thought he could hear a voice again, maybe Shane's voice, but then it grew softer and softer and was gone. Then suddenly the glow grew brighter, and it was as if his head had been cracked open and filled with light. Glorious convergence with the sun. He whirled around, his eyes darting back and forth. He needed to get it all down. He needed to record everything it was telling him. He could type it all into the computer, but that wasn't enough. There could be a power failure, and then everything would be lost. No, he needed to write it. But he didn't have a pen, a pencil, paper. He hadn't used actual paper since he was a child. The computer would have to do. On his way back to it, he slipped again, went partly down, soaking his knee and the hand in gore. He looked at his hand, dripping with blood, its bloody double inscribed right on the flesh of his thigh. And then he knew what to do. He dipped his fingers in Dantek's blood and approached the walls, waiting for his mind to crack open again. When it did, it flared with symbols. He could see them perfectly in his head, shimmering there. Frantically, he began to jot them on the walls, writing as quickly as he could, stopping only to dip his fingers in blood again. At first, there was something like an N, but only backward, with a bead on the bottom of its leg. Then an L, but upside down, with its horizontal bar crimped. Then something that looked like the prow of a ship moving left to right, a porthole just visible, and a circle within a circle. After that, he was writing so furiously, trying to keep up with his figures streaming through his head, that he couldn't keep track. He could only let his fingers trace out the patterns and move on. When he hit the porthole, he didn't stop. He just wrote it right over it. Anything that got in the way, he wrote on. After a while, he was running out of space and started writing smaller so that there'd be enough room. When he ran out of room on the walls, he wrote on and under the instrument panels. When he ran low on blood, he stomped on what was left of Dantek's chest, trying to force more out, but only a little came out, so he stomped on a limb hard and blood began to leach out. Before long, Dantek's body had been torn to pieces, looking even less human than when he'd started. The comm unit crackled, sending out an angry hiss of static. F7. It said. Not now, Tanner, he said. Will you read? It said. Not now, he shouted. The ceiling was already covered. The walls were already covered. All that was left was the floor. He piled the pieces of Dantek's body in the command chair. He tried to strap them in, but quickly realized it was useless. That was all right, he told himself. The vessel wasn't moving. They weren't going anywhere. There was hardly any blood left, and what was left on the floor was beginning to clot. He dipped his fingers in it, kept writing in light, wispy strokes, conserving the blood, but very quickly he ran out of floor. He wished Shane were there to tell him what to do next. Had he done the right thing? Had he betrayed his brother? He stayed there on his knees, staring. It was hot, almost too hot to bear. How could it be so hot? He stood up and took off his shirt, threw it onto the other chair. It helped a little, but not enough. He was still hot. He took off his shoes, piled them on top of the shirt, then took off his pants, his underwear. Naked, he stared down at his body. Pale, he thought. White as a sheet. No, not as a sheet, he corrected. White as paper. And then he knew where he would write next. Only there wasn't any more blood. He'd used all of Dantek up. He hadn't saved enough to write at the ending. He looked around. Surely there was more blood here, somewhere. Didn't they travel with bags of blood? What if they needed to go on and what if they needed to do an onboard transfusion? How could they go anywhere without blood? His eyes were scanning over the room, searching, and then they passed over his arm, saw the pulse of a vein. Ah, he said, breaking into a smile. That's where you're hiding. There you are. It wasn't easy to get the blood to come out, but in the end he managed, tearing the arm open with the sharp corner of the same strut he had used to discipline Dantek. At first, the blood came readily, and he could simply rub the finger against his arm and then inscribe the symbol on his body, but quickly the wound slowed and began to clot. He had to tear it open again, and then a third time. By the time he was done, it was as if he himself had become a representation of the marker. He was beautiful, covered with a swarm of symbols, all the knowledge of the universe expressed on the surface of his skin. He stood straight, arms to his sides, and held still. He was the marker. He could feel its power flowing through him. How long he was like that, he couldn't say. He was snapped out of it by a sharp noise and an intense pain in his head. He swayed and fell down, clutching his temples. When the noise finally stopped, he stood and stumbled up. He had more to do, he remembered confusedly. He had to tell them. He had to warn them. He turned on the vidscreen and stood in front of it, set it to simultaneously record and to broadcast on all frequencies. The message was for everyone. Shane had been clear about that. He needed to tell everyone, if the message could get through the rock and muck at all. Hello, he said to the vidscreen. Officer James Hennessy here, acting commander of the SS Marker. I've been informed by my brother Shane that there's something we all need to know. There was a stabbing pain in his head, as if someone were prodding his optic nerve with the tip of a dull knife. He clutched his head and leaned on the counter. After the pain had passed, he stood there for a moment, unsure of where he was. He opened his eyes and looked around him, unable to take it all in. Then suddenly he remembered. He was on TV! He gave the camera his most winning smile. What was he doing again? Oh, yes, that's right. He was saving humanity. We've heard the wrong whispers, he started. There's little time, and we're listening to what they say, but Shane says we should not obey. We are not following the right answers. We have to resist the past before it's too late. Too late for convergence. He gave his winning smile to the camera again, looking straight and intensely into the camera. And when watching would realize he was talking directly to them. They had to understand how important this was. I've drawn a map, he said, gesturing to his body. I don't know if that's what Shane wants, but I looked at the marker and looked at it, and then I had to draw. We need to change our ways and learn to understand it, he said. He shook his head confused. Had he gotten off track somewhere? Or else not understand it, he said. It was like there were two forces inside him fighting to claim him, and he was no longer sure which was which, and which he should listen to. The marker caught his eye through the porthole. He watched it pulse a long moment. He looked at his left hand, then looked at his right hand, and slowly brought them together in front of him. Convergence, he said. He gestured at the marker through the porthole, then gestured at the symbols on his body. We need to understand it, he said, even though part of him was screaming at him to stop. That's the only thing that's important right now, to learn from it. It is the way. We need to understand it, not destroy it. He backed away and turned the vid off. He was so tired now. His head hurt. He needed to rest. He would rest for just a minute, and then head for home. He lay down on the floor. He felt both hot and cold. His bare body felt unnatural against the smooth floor. Slowly he folded in on himself until he was curled into a ball and started to shiver. At the end, he had a brief moment of lucidity when he realized that he was tired because the oxygen was running out, when he realized that something else had controlled everything he had done, everything he had said, but by the time he realized this, it was far too late to do anything about it. I'll get up in a moment, he thought. I'll get up and drill my way back up to the surface, and I'll sort this mess out. A moment later, he lapsed into unconsciousness. Not long after, he was dead. Okay, so both people, this fucking Bath Scaff is just full of dead people now. Okay, so what Hennessy has experienced here is a common element of marker madness when it affects quote-unquote smart people. Now, when quote-unquote smart people are affected by the marker, there's a couple things that happen. They are given the blueprints for creating their own markers. This happened to Isaac Clarke. This happened to... oh, God, what's his fucking name? The patient 5? Oh, God. Oh, God, what's his name? He was in the movie. He's like the main character of the movie. Hold on. This is going to bug me if I don't figure it out right now. Because Nolan Strauss. Nolan Strauss is his name. Now, in addition to that, this is actually a similar thing to how the marker, or the shard of the marker, affects Nolan Strauss in Dead Space Aftermath. It connects with him. He starts seeing symbols, and he starts needing to write them down immediately. And according to what he said, it's basically a formula for altering human DNA. into something glorious and eternal. Not glorious and eternal in the way that, like, unitologists would look at it, but, like, glorious and eternal in the way that, like, a scientist, I guess, would look at it, technically, in this case. Now, obviously, Hennessy's writing implement options are kind of limited. So he just starts kind of dipping into Dantek's blood there, writing it all over the walls, so on and so forth. I haven't really, like, studied marker scrawl a whole lot, so I can't say for certain, like, if the symbols that he is referring to have, like, in-game counterparts, because the marker scrawl symbols in Dead Space follow a pretty, like, standard letter-to-letter cipher. You can find, like graffiti in at least the first game, giving you an alphabet of the marker scrawl to kind of get an idea of, like, exactly what it is that each symbol means. But I'm not familiar with it enough to say if, like, the ones that he has are, like, similar to exactly what is in the game. Now, Hennessy mentions that there are basically two voices inside of him. One of them telling him to leave the marker alone, the other telling him to study the marker. This is what I'm saying. Fucking Brethren Moons are playing hard to get. And he records a fun little vidlog, which is pretty similar to... So a lot of Dead Space media actually opens with video logs like this, where it's like somebody at the end of their rope in despair, moments before they just fucking die, and trying to, like, give out some sort of warning of some kind. This happened in the Dead Space comic with oh god, what was that guy's name? Hold on. What's this motherfucker's name? Newman. Officer Newman, PSEC. The comic starts with him recording the vidlog that he makes at the end of the comic series after all hope on the Aegis 7 colony is lost, and he is just going to wander off and die somewhere in its various halls. This happens in Dead Space Downfall. With Alyssa... Is that how... It's dawning on me. I don't know how a lot of these characters spell their names. Oh, there's an I in it. Okay. This happens in Dead Space Downfall with Alyssa Vincent. The movie opens with her saying that, like, the marker must be destroyed, which is the video log that she records before she opens up a fucking airlock and launches all of the necromorphs in the landing bay into fucking space. Not really accomplishing anything in the long run, but, you know, go figure. She's doing her best and is also dead. And then, of course, this also happens in Dead Space proper, with Nicole's famous video log, where, of course, what happens is she is sending a message to Isaac about how, like, hey, shit's fucked. Things are going so badly here. I don't know what to do. And then, of course, it ends with her giving herself an injection of something. Could be anything. Could be nothing. She could be just putting air into her veins, which would definitely kill her if it's above a certain amount. Give her a motherfucking embolism? That's a fucked up way to die, let me tell you. Just like, that is nightmare-inducing. Nightmare-inducing way to die. So Hennessy lies down to take a little nap. But oops! He dead. He died. He's dead now. But that final message, as per Shane's instructions, went out to everyone. Everybody. Not just Dredger Corp. He didn't just send that to Dredger Corp. It was sent to everyone across all bands of communication. So, Dredger Corp's going to have a little bit of explaining to do now. Also, that fucking bathyscap is just stuck there now. So that's going to be interesting for them to try and retrieve, if they're going to be able to retrieve it at all. Because, according to Dantec, they did manage to shave off a chunk of that marker, so who knows? The outcome of this is something that we're going to have to take a look at next week when the Sharkstream Book Club reconvenes. I want to thank everybody for coming by. I hope you all had a good time. I know I did. If you enjoyed this stream, you can subscribe here on Twitch. We have special emotes for subscribers. You can also follow me on Twitter at sane_intolerant or on YouTube at youtube.com/saneintolerant, where I post all these streams after they happen. Sorry about no stream yesterday. Originally, the plan was that there was going to be a big birthday blowout cat pull stream for B's birthday. But Audrey's power went out for a particularly long period of time, and when the time came, it was still out, and we decided that we would just kind of have like a fun Discord party without having to worry about streaming it. I don't know if we're going to replace that stream. Like, maybe I'm gonna check with them, see if they might be up for doing anything on Sunday potentially. But it might just be we're going to continue Castlevania Lords of Shadow next Friday. Other upcoming streams include some more Skyward Sword on Wednesday. I'm going to be seeing if Molly will be up to joining for that. And then on Thursday, we will be starting God of War Ghost of Sparta, the second PSP game. Depending on whether or not Sunday happens for Lords of Shadow, next Friday is either going to be the finale of Lords of Shadow or possibly the beginning of Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate, depending on exactly how that all kind of plays out. And then, of course, next Saturday, we will be moving on to Part 3 of Dead Space Martyr. The Noose Titans. So I hope you'll tune in for that. And again, if you want to go ahead and keep up with the Sharkstream Book Club, you can get your own copy of Dead Space Martyr. It's still in print, so you can grab a print version of like Amazon or whatever if you want. Or you can grab a digital version of it. It is available for like ebooks, and I want to say also audio. There's probably like an audiobook version if you want to go ahead and keep up with the stream. If you want to read part 3 by next week's stream, like I just, if you want to be like a deeper part of the conversation. But yeah. So we will be getting in on that next week, and we'll have a bunch more chapters here. Looks like there's about 10 chapters in part 3, making up a total of... What would that be? That's 109 to 172... So that's like, what, 63 pages? This is very intense music for me ending the fucking stream. But yeah. Oh, so, VTuber was done by Audrey and B of Team Catpull, whose work you can find on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube at Team Catpull. That's TEAMCATPLE. Don't email them. I highly recommend checking their stuff out. They're both fantastic, and they're great friends of mine. This little chalkboard background was done by my lovely wife, Natalie, who you can find on Twitter at GhostyNaps, GHOSTIENAPS. She is very funny, probably one of the funniest people I know, and just great. I love her so much. She's very good. Good wife. Anything else? I think that's about everything. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. And I will see you next time on the Sharkstream. Same shark time, same shark channel. Take care, everybody.